All right, welcome once again to the Theology Experience, where my goal is to experience theology through long form, open dialogue. I'm your host, Trey Brickley, and today we are experiencing theology with Spencer Owen. Spencer is a husband, father, and a certified licensed counselor and therapist whose practice is called Renewed Life Counseling, where his goal is to transform lives through the renewing of body, mind, and spirit. Spencer is also the creator of the Trauma Informed Church Kid YouTube channel, podcast, and Facebook group, where his goal is to reconstruct religion for the hurting with theology that doesn't hurt, to facilitate a biblically grounded, trauma informed faith. Spencer, welcome. I'm glad you joined me for episode 11 of the Theology Experience.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Trey.
Yes, it's been a long time coming. We've had so many recorded, unrecorded conversations in the past. You're a fitting guest. I'm very glad to have you. And actually, before we get too far down the road, I just wanted to say that one of the taglines, or not taglines, just
hmm
the ways that you described your purpose for the Trauma Informed Church Kids podcast was to say
Yep.
resurrection on the other side of deconstruction, which I
Right.
found quite apropos because of how you and I were introduced to each other. Actually,
Very
if
much.
I remember, yeah, if I remember correctly, we interacted at first in a group that I
hmm
created for Bible Project content, and
Yeah.
it had something to do with the Passover during their Torah journey. But
Uh-huh.
what happened very quickly after that point in time where we were introduced was I essentially went through a period of deconstruction where I
Yeah.
lost faith in Messiah and started having all these doubts and historical criticism issues and all that. And really,
Uh-huh.
it was you and several other key people, but you were definitely one of
hmm
them who I started having kind of more in-depth conversations with, and
hmm
I would say that those conversations were a key part of my quote unquote resurrection on the other side of deconstruction. So
Nice.
I just wanted to I just want to put a pin in that and say thank you first and foremost, and that's
Good.
obviously one key reason why you're here today.
Awesome. Well, yeah, well, thank you, but I mean, of course, glory to God for all things. So,
Amen. So, the first topic of discussion, as with all guests today, Spencer, is your theological journey. And so
yeah.
I watched, listened to the live launch party on
hmm
your Trauma Informed Church Kid podcast, where you started to
hmm
kind of give your story, just wave tops, high level view, introducing yourself
hmm
to your listeners. And I thought it was funny how many similarities there were that I was hearing, where you talk about being a church kid, going to altar
Yep.
call as a kid, church 3 times a week,
Yep.
sword drills,
Yep.
active in the community, baptized as a young teen, Christian college, married a girl at the college, little dog with an awesome name, holiness, purity, culture, left behind influence. I was like, goodness, is he writing my
Yeah.
story? So,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
but I want to hear it from
It's
you. And
definitely a bubble that has a lot of very similar traits that most everybody who has kind of gone through the system has. Not necessarily the identical experiences, but like a lot of those things where you go, oh yeah, Salty the Singing Songbook, or
yeah,
oh yeah, I remember. Of course, Veggie Tales is the quintessential,
yes,
but then several other little features there. So
yes. Well, despite those similarities, obviously there's differences. So I just kind of
of
wanted you
course, yeah,
to,
yeah,
as in as much detail as you'd like, give
sure,
the audience and me a more in-depth understanding of your theological journey, how you encountered the Bible, scriptures, theology, the
sure.
path until where you are now, and kind of where you are now.
Okay. Well, distilling that is going to be kind of difficult, but I will do my best.
That's
In
why it's
some
a
of,
3 hour show.
I was going to say it's kind of a good thing because in some of the in some of the chats that I have, I get the nickname Treebeard, because it's never say anything unless it's worth taking a long time to say. So
Mm.
I'll fit right in here. Uh, but so I have always grown up in the church setting. Like my family is as many generations back as we have been able to track have been church going people and Bible believing Christians. And so I don't necessarily have any sort of a history or story of something out there, so to speak, that I was quote unquote rescued from. However, having always had that upbringing, I have definitely nuanced and shaded and changed quite a bit from that particular upbringing, to the point now where, I mean, I still keep in contact with many, many people from that, but there have been some significant rifts and breaks
Mm,
from several people that I have, and several features of my upbringing. Having said that, though, I mean, still retaining a lot of the core.
mm,
So it's not like a complete, deconstruction and then going off into some kind of like new age direction or anything like that. But in any case, I'd say that probably the best description for my upbringing was a fairly very conservative, bordering on fundamentalist, uh, Protestant upbringing in the Wesleyan holiness tradition, if anyone's
mm,
familiar with that. So, like,
mhm.
I've gone to Free Methodist churches, to Nazarene churches. Like most of my friends from youth group went to a Nazarene Bible college. I wound up being the quote unquote rebel and going to
Ha!
a college outside of our denomination, um,
Mm,
and then the majority of, and that kind of kickstarted the remainder of what has been my experience from that point forward, which is non-denominational evangelical, kind of stereotypical traditional conservative Protestant evangelical non-denominational stuff.
mm,
And that has its own little bubble and its own little experience,
sure.
um, that I have found less and less theological agreement with as I have continued within
Mm,
it. But I have also found more and more personal connection and value in that. And so one of the
mm.
things, the one of the ways that I describe myself now is as a ortho-friendly lapsed Protestant, meaning that I have more or less let go of most of the five fides, or sorry, solas, five solas,
Got it.
um, and more or less. I mean, there's degrees and variations there, but and I have kind of, I don't want to say replaced that, but I have leaned much more in a Eastern Orthodox orientation in terms of theology and the way that I read Scripture and those kind of things.
Mhm.
But I am not baptized Orthodox catechumen or anything other than just a simple like inquirer, basically. So I still go to a Protestant communion at a non-denominational evangelical church. My practice is closely affiliated with that church.
Oh,
I'm not an employee of that church, or I'm not like an official spokesperson of them in any way, but I am. But we do have a kind of referral relationship. So basically, if anyone in the church is needing some kind of counseling support that is more intense or more in depth than the services of the church can provide, then I am one of a few counselors that are part of the counseling center that church started, that they end up sending people to. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. But I've been in mental health work for my entire adult life, for so
mm,
20 years. I mean,
mm.
working in everything from, literally, my first job was on the streets with mentally ill homeless people out in Illinois. And
Wow.
then I've worked in hospital settings with people who are getting discharged and trying to oversee their treatment. I've worked in the schools as a school counselor for a decade,
Wow.
and I've done private practice for a little over 5 years. So that's
That
kind of the theological and professional journey.
Well,
So
that's pretty neat. I've actually never heard of that kind of setup where you have a church
yeah.
that has a counseling
Hmm.
center with, certified people such as yourself to offer additional
Yeah.
services that maybe the pastor just frankly isn't able to dig deep enough with people given the
Yes.
time that they have.
Hmm.
So that makes a lot of sense. And that's pretty cool that you've
Well,
been able to find yourself there.
and that's one of the reasons why, even though my theological commitments are kind of diverging in some very significant ways,
Mhm.
I still maintain community and communion with that institution and with those people, is because I mean, for one, part of that is a bit of a recovery and healing necessity, in that I feel like it's really important to be with the people and in the spaces that has caused some of the difficulty and hurt for, in some cases, myself, in other cases, other people, because I think there's a definite danger of uh, demonizing and treating people as like just cardboard cutouts. And
Mm,
I would far rather stay there and say, I need to learn to love these people as people
mm,
and not as positions, and not as like a tribe or an other. And so I continue to stay there at least partly for that reason, but then also because I have genuinely come to enjoy and delight in it and be a part of that community. And so I've, gotten really involved there by teaching some of the marriage enrichment classes, by leading a couple of different small groups for new believers, and by uh, preaching a handful of times from stage as well. And so there have definitely been uh, there's been a a bit of a period of trying to understand where I actually land on some of these things, but by and large, though, I really want to stay with these people because I have a heart for them. I want to help them not just simply see the error of their ways in some cases, but to help them see the world a little bit differently. Because as I have come to see it, I find much more beauty
mm.
than I have before. So
Yeah, so tell me more about your kind of ideological, theological departure from Protestantism into
sure.
non-denominational
Hmm.
Protestantism
Hmm.
into where you are now with regard to being having far more affinity for, you could say, Eastern Orthodox theology.
Hmm. Yeah, sure. Um, let's see what it started. Probably about something like 8 or 9 years ago, and that that itself was, the the end, or not end point, but the tail of a larger journey as well, where so I was going initially to a church that was here in downtown Colorado Springs. That was a plant of New Life Church, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. That's the church that kicked off the majority of the evangelical scandals with Pastor Ted Haggard
Okay.
and more recently Brady Boyd.
Mm,
But yes, it's a mega church out here in Colorado Springs, and I went to a kind of satellite of that. And so I kind of got a bit of a, not quite front row seat, but let's say orchestra level seat to some of those things, and witnessed some of the difficulty there. And that really affected me and shook a lot of my kind of just ordinary ways of thinking coming out
mm,
of a conservative Christian college.
mhm,
And then from there, I started to really kind of dive really deep down a what I would call a hyper grace rabbit hole.
mm.
The particular branch of evangelical Christianity that is heavily antinomian, very
Right,
very much so.
right.
And so I did that for a while. Didn't find that to be particularly satisfying in the end. And I also spent a good bit of time doing what I call like wrestling with disturbing parts of scripture. So looking at some of that deconstruction narrative, specifically reading a lot of like Greg Boyd
Mm,
and some of the other people who take a what I would consider to be a little bit looser approach to the Bible.
mhm,
And I was sympathetic, but never quite convinced. But I certainly like found value in the arguments.
mm,
Um, and then after all of that, just kind of that was a little bit of like my own church kid sort of wandering in the wilderness, so to speak.
mm, mm,
But then at the end of that is when I discovered, or when my wife told me that she was pregnant, and I was going to become a father.
mm.
At that point, I realized, okay, now I'm responsible for. I mean, it's one thing if I'm just kind of wandering in the wilderness myself. It's another thing if I'm responsible for someone else,
Yeah.
and I'm leading them
Mhm.
either astray or God knows where.
Yeah.
Not to say that that would be like, a bad thing for everybody, but it just was something that for me specifically, I felt very convicted. Like, I need to know these things. I need to settle.
Yeah.
And so I started initially with the most basic question of how can I answer at a 5-year old level, why did Jesus have to die?
Hmm.
Um, and so that led me down a rabbit hole of initially trying to support and defend penal substitutionary atonement. And uh, I started off reading things like from Leon Morris and John Stott, all the classics and Saxonovi and all of those kind of people. And along the way, I realized the logic isn't holding together. And so then
Mm.
but I also realized, even as such a church kid with with a history in Bible quizzing and you know sword drills and everything else, like there was so much I didn't know about the actual text. So that started me going back to the actual text and reading a ton of Hebrews and Leviticus and commentaries from Milgram and Gain and Levine and Schwartz and just a bunch of other like primary sources. And getting into that more deeply just exploded things. um, because anyone familiar with the non-denominational evangelical Protestant worldview would tell you that that PSA, which is what I'll shorthand for penal substitutionary atonement, PSA is considered to be the gospel,
Mm.
like
Hmm.
the center of it all.
Hmm.
And to question the foundation of that causes a lot of other questioning. And now, not immediately, not like, oh, well, if this is true, if this isn't true, then what else can't be true?
Mm.
But from the perspective of just, in some cases, simply getting back to the text itself and reading the text really, really closely, almost
Mm.
like taking my glasses off that I've been taught to wear and reading them as they are, that really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I think from there, it started to get into more of a exploration of Paul and
Mm.
the relationship of the law to Christians and Old and New Testament connection points. And
Hmm.
I think it was in the earlier stages of that you and I met up. I
Nice.
was
Good
still
timing.
fairly, yeah, yeah. I think I had just read that book by McDermott with that was contributed to by like Rudolph and Moffat and
Mm.
Kinzer and several other people in the kind of Paul within Judaism or Messianic Judaism school, Rosner, yeah, those kind of people. And I was I was fairly convinced of the probable validity, but I hadn't quite fleshed out, because it takes a lot to break a whole
Yeah,
system of thinking.
for sure.
So I hadn't quite fleshed out exactly what or why or how or all those things. And so you have actually been a bit of a passenger seat witness for an awful lot of the development of my thinking in that area.
Makes
So
sense.
yeah, then it started to change that perspective. And then once I saw greater continuity between the old and the new, that's when I started to go, oh, so maybe I should really pay attention to a style of worship and a style of Christian living that looks a lot more like a Jewish
Mm.
style and way of
Mm.
living. And that's why I started to, in the last like 3 years or so, explore Eastern Orthodoxy, because a lot of their practices and ways of reading the text are deeply rooted in
Mm.
the liturgical traditions of ancient Judaism. So, or what we call ancient Judaism. It was really just the worship of Yahweh. So
Right, right.
anyway,
Yeah,
that's
ancient
kind of the
Yahwism.
yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So that is probably the not really quick, but certainly high level, dirty explanation of kind of where I'm at. So,
Yeah, thank you. So I'm curious if, and I think you might have just answered it, but just to clarify, so you said it's really within the last 3 years that you've
hmm
come to see more validity to something like Eastern Orthodoxy. Now,
hmm
I'm curious
yeah.
if would you say that that's like a happy coincidence of your studies, or that Eastern Orthodoxy
Mm.
in and of itself has been an object of your study to the point where you're like, yeah, this is th-
Hmm.
receiving the resources from this particular tradition
Yeah.
has informed the way that I read it, or you're like, oh,
Okay.
here's how I'm studying things, and there's Eastern Orthodoxy shining there, like the result of
Got
what I'm
it.
studying. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. As always with these things, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg. I'm not quite sure exactly how it all happened. My best recollection is that I got to a place where I was fairly confident that the sola scriptura model was incorrect.
Mm,
Um, and or at least the sola scriptura model as I'd always been taught it.
right.
And I know there's all kinds of nuances there people can say about prima scriptura versus all kinds of other variations of what scripture alone actually means.
Hmm.
But nevertheless, I think once I got to that point, I realized, okay, so if I can't just simply encounter the text of scripture as myself and expect to kind of get the download, so to speak,
Mm,
of what it means, I need to explore more about how the history of Christians as a whole have read these texts. And so I would start at the beginning, or at least as close to the beginning as I could, which is the patristic era and the early church fathers. And so I started reading those
okay.
and doing
Wh-
that more closely because I had never really seriously read them as a good solo scriptura Protestant. It's like, yeah, that's all nice and all, but I mean, that's not the Bible. So you don't really need to read. You're better off spending your time reading the
mm,
Bible.
mm,
And then I started to realize that actually there's you read one passage of the Bible and you have dozens of interpretations and sometimes very serious passages and very serious divergences.
mhm.
And so trying to understand better about what these passages mean, I kind of went back to the beginning to say what do they mean from the start. So,
Yeah, that's a totally understandable impulse. I mean, I remember, and this might even be similar timing based on the way you just described it, but I remember in roughly 2020, yeah, 2020,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
um, I had a friend who also was Oneness Pentecostal like myself, who had left the
mm-hmm,
movement and who had become a catechumen of the Orthodox Church, and him and I were having a lot of
mm-hmm,
conversations, and he recommended a book to me by a man by the name of David Berceau. The book's called Common Sense, and
hmm,
the basic burden of the book was if you want to understand the scriptures, especially the New Testament, then you need to understand the post-apostolic pre-Nicene church fathers. That was the
mm-hmm.
basic idea. It's like, hey, these guys are your interpretive hermeneutical key. Um,
Got it.
in fact, he wrote a book called A Dictionary of Early Christian Beliefs, and it's literally just a compendium of theological topics with citations from all of those fathers about every one of those issues. Okay.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, so
I,
basically
I need to look into that.
I'll send you a link. It's actually a pretty good
Yes.
resource.
Yes.
Um, and I believe it's available on Logos, but definitely on Kindle. But anyway, my point
Okay.
is just to say that I'm very familiar with that line of thinking because I myself was partial to it in 2020. Like, hey, if I
Hmm.
want to, first of all, yes, I need to actually take these guys seriously because similarly to you, they had never really been a part of my theological journey. They're just these
Right.
guys that sometimes come up, but they
Yeah.
don't really matter.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started reading them in depth in about 2020. And in fact, I did some study sessions with several Eastern Orthodox guys for about a year, where we were just reading all of them from, the Epistle of Barnabas all the way through Ignatius's letters and so on and so forth,
Hmm.
Justin Martyr. But anyway, I didn't mean to distract from what you were saying. It's just that there's
No, it's
definitely
good.
a similarity there in our journeys
Yeah.
of that way
Hmm.
of thinking. Um, so you're at a point it sounds like where I'll just note this and then we can talk about it later.
Sure.
I've since then come to, while viewing those writers and those writings as historically important sources, I've since come
Hmm.
to view them with more suspicion and hesitation than
Hmm.
it sounds like you have.
Yep.
It sounds like basically what
Yeah.
you've
Hmm.
experienced is um actually more appreciation for them as you study. Correct me if I'm
Hmm.
wrong.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I have gotten really, really deep into that. I mean, like I have read just about, I mean, at least all the extant writings that I have access to outside of a, scholarly subscription of some sort. So like I still like Cyril of Alexandria is still a big hole for
Mm,
me.
mm,
I haven't quite accessed a bunch of his writings, but I mean, all the started off with the like you with the pre-Nicenes, and
yes.
I feel fairly confident that I've read through all of those at least once, in many cases multiple times, and then especially the Cappadocians,
Mm,
which is like Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory of Nazianzus, and then yeah, and then also I've read portions of Origin, not in much depth. Um, Mostly because like Origin and Augustine are going to be my next tackle projects I want to tackle, just because
right.
those two are such controversial and complicated figures that
Yes.
I really just need to like set everything else aside and focus really heavily on those two. And
And they
so
both wrote a
that's
lot.
yeah, they
So
did. Yeah, they did. Yeah, and so that's why I haven't really, I mean, I'm going to admit my blind spots where they are.
sure.
So yeah, I've read that. I've also read lots of the stuff since Nicaea, like
Hmm.
Maximus the Confessor or John of Damascus,
Hmm.
or several of those other.
Chrysostom.
Yes, Chrysostom, obviously. Yep. hmm
Yeah.
Leo the Great. All those. Which, although he kind of straddled Nicaea, but you get the point.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I've obviously it's an important subject is reading all the development, if anything else, the development of the Christian tradition
Sure.
and
Yes.
as a historical phenomenon.
hmm
Yeah.
and
So
and I would argue too, to understand why. So like this to me is like the Chesterton's fence analysis. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
nope.
Okay, so G.K. Chesterton made a comment about something where he was saying, he did a thought experiment and said, let's say you have a road and then a fence that goes through the road.
Hmm.
Most people would say, well, let's get rid of that fence. He says, but first you have to understand why the fence is there.
Mm, hmm.
You
Hmm.
have to know before you do make that choice of we got to get rid of the fence. It may still wind up being that in the end you say, okay, now I know why the fence is there, but I still don't think it's a good idea.
Hmm.
Let's get rid of it. But that's a much more informed, a much better choice than just simply, why is the fence there? Get rid of it. Which is
Mm,
honestly a good practice for politics, for a
mm,
lot of different things in everyday life, is before you immediately go straight to, I don't like this, let me get rid of it. You have to really dig down and go, let me understand it first. Let me see why it's here, why it functions the way it does. And from there, I can make a more informed decision about if this is a good idea or not. So,
fair enough. Yeah. Quick question, maybe.
mhm,
In your, because I would venture to guess you have, in the last few years, very likely spent much more time studying these figures than I have. So,
mhm,
as a quick question about that, how has
mhm,
that in particular, how has that study in particular
mhm,
influenced your view on the law of Moses and Paul and all that, like you
mhm.
were talking about earlier, which was a key part of your journey?
Yeah. Really, really good question. Honestly, it came after the fact. So, m- usually most of my I like I said, I'm still developing and
Hmm.
finalizing some of my positions on there, but I'd say broad strokes are fairly well established at this point. But I would certainly say when I started looking back into things related to the law of Moses, that was much more modern scholarship. Like I mentioned,
Hmm.
all the Paul within Judaism school, um, and I think okay, I'm gonna get people confused. No, yeah, I think Paula Fredrickson was my first
Nice.
introduction to that, and then from there it was Nanos and Rudolph and Rosner and Thiessen and a few others. But so again, all very modern scholars, and so
Right.
I think I had a fairly well established sense of okay, this is how I see the relationship between the old and the new. And then I started encountering the patristics.
Mm,
And there definitely is a tension, without a
mm,
doubt.
mm,
I mean, and that's putting it mildly in some cases. And uh, between the way that they read that relationship between the old and the new, and the way that I read that relationship between the old and the
mm.
new. And so, if there's any one area where I'm more inclined than any other to say, I don't know if the patristics really got it right here, it's that area.
Interesting.
Having said that, I always am trying to do the Chesterton's fence
Right,
analysis for
right.
all of them. So when they say things that strike my modern ear as being, well, I mean, I'll just be really honest. In the case of like Chrysostom and
Mm,
Just a Martyr, some
mm-hmm.
things that sound extremely anti-Semitic and very, uh, yeah, very, very ugly.
Just
There,
what?
there are some times where, like, yeah, I mean, Chrysostom has a whole thing called "Against the Jews,"
Mm,
like, so it's like those things are there. I don't ignore or deny them, but I'm always trying to look at them and say, okay, let me listen to this not with my ears, but with their ears. I want to
mm.
hear what he would have meant by these phrases and these terms and these ways of thinking, and do that in the context in which he wrote, and what the parting of the ways that was burgeoning at that time, what the major issues were there, what the concerns were, and basically hear his imaginary opponents, not with my
Sure.
ears, but with his ears. So,
Yeah, what you're describing reminds me of a proverb from the book of Proverbs, and it's essentially, um, he who answers a matter before he hears it, to him it is folly. Now that can become
yeah.
toxic, that can become extreme because it's like,
Yes.
oh, you can't have an opinion on a matter until you've read 5 million words about it.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but I think that's obviously wisdom that you're displaying there. So
Hmm.
appreciate that. And correct me if I'm wrong. What I heard was that the church fathers in particular have not actually been much of an influence on your perspective on this issue, right?
Not formative developmental. No.
Yeah,
They
right.
have continued to be, just because they themselves are very formative and, for me as a whole. Um, but that on that specific issue, it was not a I read Just a
Yeah,
Martyr and then I decided how to read Paul. It was much more like I read Rosner and Thiessen and Nanos, and that informed how I read Paul, and
got
then
it.
I read Just a Martyr. So,
Okay, and actually, another quick clarifying question about how you read Paul, because I remember when I first was introduced to you and we started having those conversations, those several years ago, the Jesus,
hmm.
Paul, and the Law conversations, which, by the way, side note, are the first videos on your channel.
Hmm.
I laughed
Hmm.
when I opened up your Trauma Informed Church Kid YouTube
Yeah.
channel, and I
Yeah.
went to the oldest video and I saw my mug. I'm like, what? Um,
You're
but
like,
then I
I didn't know I
realized
was a part of this.
but then I realized that
Yeah.
it was just your old channel that you had renamed, and
Right.
so you kept it up there.
Right.
And I appreciate that you kept them up there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But from my recollection at the time, you would
Yeah.
have said of yourself that you were within a Paul so-called new perspective on Paul. But
Correct.
it
Yes.
sounds to me like you've kind of walked more in towards the so-called
Hmm.
Paul within Judaism camp of scholarship.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. I kind of classify myself as like, if as hanging on to both with one of each hand.
Okay.
But I'm gripping Paul within Judaism quite a bit harder
Okay.
than
Fair enough.
I'm holding new perspective a lot more loosely.
Well,
Yes.
NT Wright's getting old, so you gotta kind of hold his hand a little bit along the way. No, I'm kidding. That's totally understandable. And I think, I mean, that's almost identical to my journey because um, when we started having those conversations,
Hmm.
I was essentially convinced of what some have called the traditional perspective. And then
Yes.
I
Hmm.
started or the old perspective on Paul, which is
Hmm.
essentially that
Hmm.
he was antinomian, that he thought that the law
Hmm.
had ended and
Yep.
grace and the law were opposed and all that. And then
Yep.
I started kind of opening myself up to more thinking along the lines of the new perspective on Paul, and then I pretty much just became convinced of the Paul within Judaism perspective. So you're
Yeah.
less
Hmm.
you're less committed to the Paul within Judaism perspective, but it sounds like,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Hmm.
very similar there.
Yep.
And I don't want
Yep.
to rehash the Jesus, Paul, and the law conversations. I would say that for the listeners, that is a really important series of conversations that Spencer and I and
Yeah.
several other brothers have had that has just burgeoned into a lot of conversations over the years. I recommend giving them a listen. There's really good content on there, and I would love to have you back again, Spencer, sometime on the show to talk specifically about that issue more in
Yeah.
depth sometime.
Good.
But for the purposes of this episode, I wanted to talk about some different things. So first of all,
Okay.
you've already given some insight here, but let's just go through the bullets real quick. So when it comes to your
Hmm.
theological work, you
Hmm.
mentioned you did go to college, but tell me more about your education, formal and
Yeah.
informal. How has that
Sure.
looked in your life?
Sure. So, I went to a Christian college called Huntington University, which was a small private Christian college out in northeastern Indiana, out by Fort Wayne. And it was affiliated at the time with United Brethren of Christ. I'm not sure. I don't think it still is. I think it's Missionary Alliance now, I think. Um, that's where that's where I got my bachelor's. I initially wanted to be a lawyer, and
Oh
so I
wow.
was trying to get my bachelor's in a dual major in communication and philosophy. And I got about 2.5 years through that and said, I cannot do whatever it takes to be a lawyer in terms of job, like uh, hourly requirements, paperwork
Mm,
requirements. I knew enough about myself to know that that would be a dead end.
mm.
So I just said, okay, hard left turn. What do I do? Initially, my thought was, well, I could be a mediator, like a legal mediator, which is kind of like
Mm.
in the
Kind of
law
like a lawyer.
field,
Yeah.
but not, lawyer, so to speak. And even when I wanted to be a lawyer, I started off initially wanting to do constitutional law,
Ooh.
but then I was like, no, I don't know if that's quite going to be me. And so instead, I wanted to do divorce and child custody law, like
Mm.
work in that field. But and so when I wanted to be a mediator, I wanted to do that stuff. I wanted to help people, still stay in the same niche, but just help people get out of uh, um, legal situations like that,
Mm.
and hopefully help resolve it before it became too contentious, too difficult. And and then from there, I think around the same time is when I took my first psychology class at college. And that's what kind of hooked me. And then I was like, oh, okay, actually, I think this is what I like is like, I, I frame it to a little bit kind of like I started off way downstream and I just kept moving further and further upstream, where it was like, okay, I was going to be a lawyer helping people after the marriage is broken. And then I took
Mm.
one step upstream and tried to
Mm.
figure out how can I be a lawyer and help them as it's breaking. And then I
Yes.
took another one up and I was like, okay, how can I help people hopefully before it breaks or as it's in the
Nice.
process of breaking? Because I do both individual and couples counseling now. Of course, I didn't start that way. You have to go through a whole licensure process and everything else involved with that. But that's where I wound up leaving college, wanting to do was to get my own private practice, eventually be able to do marriage and family counseling. When I started to get my master's degree, however, there was a bit of a delay there because of some issues with the place where I started to get my master's at U of I in Illinois. And then I wound up having to transfer out to Colorado because my wife and I got married. And we had to decide, am I going to delay my master's or delay getting married? And we chose the former. So I kind of waited a little while, got burnt out in that time period and had to really rethink my trajectory. So instead I went to school counseling, and that's what I actually got my master's in, was in counseling, or that specific area.
When you say school
And the
counseling,
benefit of that, yes.
you mean like the I've never been in a public high school, so but I've heard
Uh-huh.
about it. It's essentially
Yeah.
like in that environment, you're counseling kids on what they're going to do after high school or something like
Mm.
that.
So school counseling covers all grade levels, K through 12. And I think even beyond. I could be wrong about that. But I actually did the majority of my school counseling career in fact, the entirety of my school counseling career outside of my internship in elementary and middle school, not high
Okay.
school. So it looks different at each level. So elementary school counselors do an awful lot of what I call hand holding and feelings teaching. You, I you would be an elementary school counselor is basically there as like a mentor, because you can't really do counseling in any school setting, honestly, um,
Hmm.
because it's a really difficult proposition to say sit down with like in middle school, for example. And I had this problem. Sit down with a 12-year-old who is engaging in self-harm and who is feeling, really miserable about their body and about their
Hmm.
identity and everything else, and say, okay, let's talk about this for 10 minutes and then I'm going to send you back to math.
Right.
Like, that's a really difficult proposition to do.
And I
Well,
assume you're in a public school context, so I have to
mhm.
imagine your hands are somewhat tied as to what you can and
Oh yeah.
can't say and all that.
Yes, yes,
So,
and that's precisely why I got out of school counseling.
yeah.
But that's toward the end of the narrative. So, yeah, so I got my master's in school counseling. Started off at an elementary school. There, I did an awful like I would rotate to different classrooms and teach about. I had a whole curriculum that I had created, starting with like understanding what feelings are and reading books to kindergartners about here's how Johnny the tiger makes friends and stuff like that. And then, but I would also do that with the fifth graders too, and
Hmm.
start talking about here's what bullying looks like, and here's
Hmm.
how to respond to that, and here are, and those kind of psychoeducational lessons, social emotional lessons. That was a big chunk of my job. And then I would also do, because it was a school that was on a military base and pulled from the lowest enlisted personnel, there was a high rate of deployment, of high
Hmm.
risk deployment, of poverty, coming from poverty situations. So there was a really high need at that school. So I did a lot of like attendance follow up and making sure and doing a lot of uh, it's DHS here, Department of Human Services. So like CPS, DHS, everyone has different acronyms, but you know child abuse reporting, things like
Right.
that. Lots of follow up from that. Lots of I tried to do some love and logic parenting classes for some of them.
Hmm.
Anyway, point is, as a school counselor, you do a lot. And it's not just simply counseling. Some of that
Right.
is because of the developmental level, and some of that is because of the host of other jobs you have to do as a school counselor. And that's what I wound up discovering, is that the more I stayed in it, the more I realized I'm basically a educational administrator here rather than a counselor.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just saying it's not what I wanted. And so that's when I started to push to get my licensure.
Hmm.
And that's when I got my LPC, which is my licensed professional counseling credential, and did, thousands of hours of supervision for that. And then once I got that, I quit school counseling and started up my own practice.
And the rest is history.
There we are.
So it sounds to me, if I heard you correctly, you got your master's degree, additional licensure for your
Hmm.
practice.
Right.
After that, have you done any? How would you describe your education when it comes to
Yeah.
theology, with like
Yeah.
any formal, informal education? What does that look like?
No formal.
Okay.
All informal. And that has looked like a lot of online classes.
Hmm.
Um, Nothing, connected to a seminary or anything like that, but just, picking it up here and there as various things are offered, sitting in on and observing and watching and learning. Um, and then just a ton of reading
Yeah.
and discussing.
Podcasts, right?
So yes, 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 exactly. Yeah, reading, listening, and discussing. Are you familiar with the Bema podcast, Marty
Yes.
Solomon?
You introduced me to it actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, I think that might have been the very first tipping point for the Jesus and Paul and the law
Mm.
kind of perspective.
Hmm.
I'm not sure. But anyway, point is, it's just a matter of like finding whatever's out there, encountering it, and engaging with it, and along the way, seeing where it takes me. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I also have never had any formal theological education. I did start a bachelor's of science in religion. That's a funny name that people often laughed at. Bachelor's of science in religion
yes,
um, at
get
Liberty
a BS
University.
in religion.
A BS in religion. Exactly. That's the
Yes.
joke. Um, I got that. I started to do that, and I just kind of lost interest in STEAM. Just to be honest, like,
Yeah.
and I to say this like I don't say this with pride per se. It's just like I wasn't learning anything. I was just reading all of
Hmm.
this stuff that felt like fluff, you know?
Hmm.
And it wasn't very meaty. It wasn't very helpful. It wasn't like the conversation, like honestly, I feel like I learned more from 4 hours of talking to you on Jesus, Paul, and the Law podcast than I learned in 2.5 years at that school. So,
Yeah. Oh,
um,
that's good.
I think that my point is to say this, like I've also not had any formal education. My education when it comes to theology has mostly been informal. I did go to a 3.5 year Bible college for
Okay.
my the church group that I grew up in. There was a
Hmm.
institution called Texas Bible College. It's an actual college in Texas. However, what they do
Hmm.
is a satellite program where various churches essentially become little daughters of the Texas Bible College.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
so they'll have teachers, they have their already pre-built curriculum, and you can go through the classes if you're going to college. So I did that for
Okay.
3.5 years and I learned a lot. It was great, but it was extremely biased from the perspective of the
Mm.
church that I grew up in. All of the curriculum was not
Hmm.
was very low density on primary source material and very high
Mm.
density on here's what we think you should think about this primary source material, if that makes sense.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yes. Hmm.
so and then since then, yes, just voraciously reading, studying, watching, listening, talking, quote unquote armchair theologian, which I have I
Yes.
people give flack for that. I think that's the emphasis on formal education, especially in our day and age, from my perspective, is just kind of silly. Knowledge is decentralizing. We have access to so much
Hmm.
resources at our fingertips. We shouldn't shame
Hmm.
people like you who have spent a lot of time learning. Obviously, our erudite familiar can talk about it, humble, say, I don't know, but haven't been to formal educations. Like, so what? Who
Hmm.
cares? Like, just because you've been to formal education and have a degree behind your name doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. So,
Right.
all that to say, uh, understood that you haven't had formal education. Similar story for me.
Yeah. 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 And
Um,
I've thought before about, especially with the depth to which I do my study, which is quite significantly deeper. I mean, like most people do not read um, commentaries on Leviticus with the Hebrew text intact
mm,
and do that for fun. Like,
yeah,
so,
exactly.
you know, um, and so I've considered the possibility of going and getting some kind of formalized education, but I just kind of go back to like, what's the value add? And I don't so much
Yeah.
mean that like I already know it. I mean it more like, what would I do with it? Where would I go with it? Like
Yeah,
I
what are you trying to
could,
do? Yeah.
yeah, like write books maybe, but honestly, I don't know that there's a significant enough bump in marketability if you have a PhD next to your name or an MD next to your name, like MDiv, actually, I should say, than if you just, I mean, honestly, have a platform and
Yeah,
have
totally.
subscribers. And I'm not saying
Yep.
that like I'm trying to, become an influencer or anything like that, but just that that's the way things go now.
Yeah, you're
So
carving out your voice in the cacophony, you know.
right,
And
right.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. It's
In
almost like
fact,
the marketplace of ideas. Like if no
yes.
one wants to hear me, then okay, then I know. No one wants to hear me. That's fine.
Right. Well, I know that plenty of people do, and I hope that my audience, as small as it is, can help a few more people start listening to you because I think you have some valuable things to say.
Sure.
Um,
Thank you.
Okay, that covers the education piece. So ministry, we've already talked about renewed life
Hmm.
counseling. You're a
Hmm.
part of that counseling center at your church. You've talked a little bit
Yep.
about your involvement at the church. Um,
Hmm.
Now I think it'd be good to talk about trauma-informed church kid. So
Yeah.
last year you started this
Hmm.
channel, podcast,
Hmm.
and Facebook group called Trauma Informed Church Kid. And
Hmm.
what I wanted to do before we talk about it is actually just play the podcast trailer because you have a very nice short
Great.
podcast trailer where
Has
you
to be.
just yeah, where you discuss essentially what you're doing. So it's only a couple
Sure.
minutes long.
Great.
So let me get there. There we go. Okay. Just gotta make sure that I'm getting it correctly. Boom. All right, here we go. You can see it, right?
Yep, I can.
All right. Here we go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trauma Informed Church Kid Podcast. No matter who you are, I hope you know that you are welcomed and you are loved. There are a lot of podcasts and YouTube channels out there that focus on deconstruction, and a lot that focus on apologetics. Both ends of the spectrum have their audience, but that isn't this podcast. My goal is to reconstruct religion for the hurting with theology that doesn't hurt. On this podcast, we will seek out an answer to the following question: what does a biblically grounded and trauma-informed faith look like? What we'll be doing is walking through the entire Christian scriptures, start to finish, focusing on the larger narrative themes that tie it all together. In the end, it is my conviction that they reveal a God who is in love with his creation and fiercely committed to rescuing his family from the forces of darkness. This will be a half-hour podcast, and I'll be sure to give you an easy-to-digest summary at the end of each episode to not hurt your head with too much nerdery. More than that, however, I want this podcast to be something that doesn't hurt your heart or your soul. That is why I am embarking on this journey with you, to have a frank and honest conversation about church hurt. We will face up to those sins, confess them, and begin the process of what Meiko Nagasawa calls a long repentance. Part of that process will be to educate others about trauma, to better understand our own experiences of trauma, and to help the community of faith as a whole to have a more trauma-informed perspective on the Bible, on God, on humanity, and on all creation. I hope you will join me on the journey of discovering resurrection on the other side of deconstruction.
There you go. There's that phrase I mentioned at the beginning of the
Yeah,
conversation that picked
yeah.
caught my ear. So yeah, Spencer, tell me about what motivated you to start this channel, how it's
Hmm.
going, what your goals are, and so on.
Sure. Well, first thing is hearing that for the first time after almost a year and a half, I'm like, wow, I really need to maybe re-record that. Not so much because the content has changed, but just because my understanding of um, uh, technology has
Mm,
changed and improved a little bit. But nevertheless, anyway, um, so it started because as I was engaging with people online, I I found a lot of people really resonated with the way that I was reading the Bible,
hmm,
and not just something like, "Oh, wow, that makes me feel warm and fuzzy," but people going, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. This actually connects dots that I have not been able to connect so far."
hmm,
And so, like, some of that came from out of the history that I just narrated
hmm,
of my own kind of walkthrough of I it was deconstruction, but it was fairly mild in the broad scheme of things. But I do think that it still was significant enough that it caused me to question some several, very important things.
Hmm.
And so part of that is just me kind of sharing some of my own answers. And enough people, a kind of a critical mass of people, kept asking me over and over, like, do you have a podcast? Do you have a Substack? Do you have a, have you written any books? And I'm like, no, 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 no. Um, and I mean, I was more or less okay with that for a couple of years, partly because I was still kind of figuring things out and finessing and fleshing it out.
Hmm.
But then I got to a place where I'm like, a couple things happened. For one, I felt a little more secure in where I was coming from in terms of my theological and hermeneutical perspective. But then the other thing too is when I started up my counseling practice, that and working with the church, that's when I really dove very, very deep into church hurt and
Mm.
spiritual trauma and religious abuse and people who have experienced that. And that's kind of like a sub niche that I specialize in my practice, is people who have encountered harm being done at the hands of the people of God. And that is a wide category. In my last episode of my podcast, I talked about how that's everything from toxic theology all the way up to like full on cults.
Right,
And
right.
I've worked with people at pretty much every end of that spectrum.
Mm.
And so I I just realized that there was enough of my experience to be able to empathize and connect with what those people have gone through, both just personally as myself individually and what I have experienced, but then also what I have witnessed through my job and what other people who have themselves experienced it firsthand have told me. So I kind of wanted to amplify their voices a little bit more. And
Mm.
then the other thing too is, like I said, of staying in the evangelical context. I noticed that there was a heavy preponderance, shall we say, of the spiritual trauma and religious abuse that has happened has been within that context.
Mm.
Obviously, it happens everywhere. It can happen anywhere, but it is a heavy preponderance that I have witnessed. And maybe that's
Mm.
because I live in a quote unquote sort of almost evangelical mecca. Um, but it's again, I only have what I know. And so I saw enough of that I was like, I don't want to just create a bashing situation. I don't want to
Mm.
just say these people are all X and we should respond to them with Y. I really wanted for myself to understand better the heart of the people who, in some cases, are perpetrating some of these things. And so that I
Mm.
could be able to not so much be their voice, they have plenty of voice, but to be able to help people understand how they are images of God too, and help myself see them as images of God and not as simply as, awful, awful people, and to hopefully bring some healing and recovery and uh, almost like breaking from within in many cases. It is probably the best way to say it. And so that's one of the reasons why I stay, is because I really want to help, um, in some cases by undermining some foundations and saying, you really need to do this differently and
Mm.
rethink this. And in other cases, by being able to kind of quote unquote speak the language, almost like a mission field in many ways, is almost how
Yeah.
I see it. And as an opportunity to be able to, through the podcast itself, give people a narrative experience of the Bible that is trauma informed, but is not going off the deep end and saying, oh, well, this is just old stuff from a long time ago and they didn't know any better, but we do now. And we can just ignore that or write it off. Like, I really wanted to come at the Bible with a biblically grounded traditional perspective, but to inform that all at every step of the way with, what does this mean for people who have been hurt by the church or hurt by theology that the church has taught them? And not so much, I want to be clear, not to make that the first lens of, oh, well, this could hurt people. Well, then we don't need to worry about it. Or
Right,
let's
right.
let's understand that, that then this understanding can't be right. Not
Right,
that,
right.
but instead to kind of have like multiple layers of glasses of the, historical critical method, and then the, historical grammatical method, the critical scholarship of, text criticism and everything else, and then of course the narrative lenses of like Sailhammer and Alter and everything else, and then also the trauma informed
Mm,
lens. that's
mm.
that's the approach I tried to take. So
Yeah, I don't know if it was on your podcast or somewhere else, but I remember one of your podcast guests, Dr. Carmen Imes, made
mhm.
a talked about something that I think is probably a good example of what you're talking about. She was talking about
Yeah.
how in her class she teaches Old Testament, and obviously the Old Testament is the locus of a lot of difficult stories in the Bible, things
Oh
that
yeah.
people who have experienced trauma or may be traumatized by. So,
Hmm.
so she talks about how when she gets to a text in the class that she knows because she's quote unquote trauma informed, she
Hmm.
knows, hey, this text could really be a problem for somebody that's sitting in this room right now. So she'll
Yeah.
give a disclaimer, she'll let them know, she'll try to help them understand that um, their reaction to something difficult in the Bible isn't just because there's some wicked sinner, but there's like
Hmm.
stuff going on in their past and in their psyche
Hmm.
that needs to be dealt with,
Yes.
that needs to be uh, handled with care. So
Yes.
yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, I think that's basically what when I think of your ministry, I think of boxes that have a sign on them that say "fragile, handle with care."
Hmm. Hmm.
Because
That's probably fairly fair.
because I feel like that's
Yeah.
basically what you're doing is you're saying like, look, people, especially people who have been hurt in some way, like handle them with care because you can really
Hmm.
do damage if you don't. I mean, you can
Hmm.
destroy whatever's in the box if you don't, you know?
Hmm. Now, the one clarification I would add to that is, and this is something I talk about in the Facebook group, in the podcast itself, that my goal is not to create a conflict-free safe space.
Mm, mm,
My goal is to create what I call a brave space
mm,
where
mm,
we can really wrestle very intimately with very difficult topics and be willing to, and not shy away from those things just because, oh, I feel triggered, but like to not shy away from them at all. And that reflects how I do counseling work for trauma. My counseling work for trauma is very empowerment focused. It's not about like cataloging, okay, what are all your triggers, and then now we must avoid them, and here's how we do that. It's not that at all. It's much more like, okay, this is a thing that causes an activation response, is usually the term I use rather than trigger. Um, so what do we do about that? That's where your
mm,
choice
mm,
lies.
mm,
You can't change, and you had very little choice very often in what happened to you and how you instinctively respond to these things. But you do have a choice about what you do with that,
mm,
how you respond to that reaction. And if that reaction, if that response just allows the reaction to dictate your response, then you have surrendered control. And now you're caught in a feedback loop of re traumatization in many ways. Only this time, and this goes back to my interview with Dr. Timothy Petitsis, only this time you're picking up the weapons that the traumatizer or abuser has given you to continue harming yourself.
mm. You're
And
harming
so,
yourself with it now. Yeah.
yes, exactly. Yeah, they have, as he put it, they have deputized you in their as conscripts in their army to continue fighting their fight, their
Mm,
war on their behalf long after they have left your life.
mm,
And what I want to do is to be able to say, teach people, actually, that is an understandable response because of the intensity of trauma reactions. However, that is not a adaptive response. That's not a helpful response. So
Mm.
when you say fragile, handle with care, I say yes, but yes, fragile, but let's figure out how we can strengthen, resource, build,
Mm.
empower so that you
That's a
don't
really good
stay fragile.
clarification. Yeah, that's a really good clarification because that metaphor basically just suggests that people are just fragile inside the box. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, well,
Mm-hmm.
no, you got to open the box. You got to put things in its place,
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
got it, got it. Yeah, so when you said what you just said there, I think of an image I saw years ago in some of my own training on issues like this, where it was like between stimulus and response, there is a space.
Mm-hmm.
And in
That's
that
Viktor Frankl.
okay, yeah. And
Yeah.
in
Mm-hmm.
that space is your power to choose. And
Yes.
that sounds to me like basically what you just said.
Actually, so the episode I just published on the podcast, it's called "What Is Trauma," and throughout this season, I will be doing 5 episodes. I'm calling "How of Hurt," and so in those episodes, I'm kind of going in. I'm setting aside the Bible for a second, not completely, but explicitly at least, and saying what is the research telling us about what trauma is, how it affects us, and how we can heal from it in both body and spirit. um, and then also the last one will be about how do we make a trauma informed church,
Mm,
and what that will look like. So the first one of that series is the one I just did, and I talk about that very thing. And I have a little
nice.
graphic that shows that illustrates that stimulus response loop. So yes, I would encourage people to go look at that for a more in-depth study of exactly what you're talking about.
Perfect. Yeah, I also thought it was interesting, you said that your ministry has as one of its aims to help, not
Mhm.
necessarily to aid, but like people who are harming other people. You're also
Mhm.
trying to help them in a
Yep.
sense.
Yep.
And
Yes.
it reminds me of a phrase that my dad, episode number 1 of the theology experience, my dad,
Mhm.
he used to say this phrase a lot, and I'm sure he still does, but it rings in my mind when I think of you, which is that hurt people hurt people.
I
And
had that exact same line in my head as you were talking.
yeah, so
Yes.
because I mean, so often, and I mean to be honest, I can look back over my own personal experience and I
Mhm.
can see this where it's like trauma of some kind, hurt of some kind that's not properly dealt with ends up becoming a means of traumatizing and harming others.
Absolutely.
So,
I
things
think that's an excellent description of the iniquity and the sins of the fathers being
mm,
visited on the third and fourth generations.
mm,
Hmm.
interesting connection. Hadn't thought about that. Hmm. Well, we'll get there later in the show.
I
I
was
don't
going
want
to
to
say
don't want
that's
to
a
steal the thunder.
further topic for sure. But
But yeah,
yes, no, no, yeah, that is exactly what I had in my head, was that hurt people do perpetuate that hurt upon other people. And part of my podcast is myself acknowledging I was not massively hurt by that system. I mean, I have things that
sure.
I'm still dealing with for sure, but I'm not trying to paint myself as being like I'm a victim of the church system or anything. But I am trying to say I was actually part of the hurting. I
Mm,
was I was in many ways one of those people who continued to perpetuate what I was taught at the hands. I mean, it was the best they had, it was the best they could. And I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm just owning my role, and owning their role, and
mhm,
saying it stops here.
mm. Yeah,
I I don't want to be that anymore, and I want to help as many people as possible who I know, who I speak their language, who they trust me because I'm quote unquote one of them, to not do the same thing.
yeah, makes total sense. What else can you do? I mean,
Yeah,
that's seems like the
that's it.
calling that you have to do. So,
Yep.
well, and as we know, oh, there we go. As we know, of course, one of the key ways in which people are traumatized is bad Christian TV. Um,
Mhm.
so no, I'm kidding. So there's a new TV series that's released on Amazon recently that it's
Oh
called House
boy.
of David, and
Yep.
you actually on your podcast you did
Yeah.
a review of it, and I've been
Yeah.
watching that show since it was released, and we actually
Hmm.
talked a little bit about it on
Yeah.
Facebook
Yeah.
because I remember when I first watched the first episode, I was very turned off because I was like, okay, this is weird. David wasn't a bastard. Um, why would I think he was a bastard? Also, why would anyone care that his father had a child through another woman? Like it was just
Uh-huh.
all very weird to me. Um, so, but you were like, hey, give it a shot, essentially. Don't write it off just yet. So I
Hmm.
watched the rest of the first series, and by the end of the series, I was hooked, and I was just like, oh my
Hmm.
goodness, I can't wait for the second season to come
Yep.
out. So anyway, you did your own review, and I don't
Hmm.
want to. We're not going to watch the whole thing, or I don't need you to give me the full rundown. But
That's fine.
I wanted you to share kind of your thoughts about the seasons,
Hmm.
the story so far. And by the way, I assume that you've watched episode 3 of season 2 that just came out, right?
I haven't watched
Okay.
any of season 3 or season 2.
Oh, interesting. I don't want to spoil it
Yes.
then. That's good to
Okay.
know.
Okay. Yeah.
But it is out. You do have to pay for the Wonder Project in order to watch
And
it.
that's why I haven't yet.
But it's
So,
only $8. Come on.
yeah, I know. I know. Yeah.
I'm kidding.
It's not much. Yeah.
Anyway, tell me what are your thoughts about the show?
So, overall, I it was a positive review. I would say like if I were giving it stars, I would say 4 out of 5.
Hmm.
So to speak. Very in terms of production value and quality of the theology, I would say very high,
Hmm.
very good. Production value and like just artistic components, whew, real very good, very good. I mean, you're not getting a Marvel blockbuster here, so
Right,
I'm not
right.
expecting that. But given the limitations of the format of the financing and stuff like that, I say they did an excellent, superb job. And um, acting was really good um, in most cases. I would
Mm.
say there were a couple of times where I was like, okay, all right, sure. But like you kind of jokingly said, having grown up on really bad Christian TV and movies, um, I I don't want to say I give grace because I don't. I um I will take what I can get.
Mm.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So anyway, um, I found it to be a really good and very engaging story, a very interesting one, even though I knew quote unquote like the spoilers of it all. But I was always like really interested to see how they would show particular things and how they would present it. And um, I never really had a moment where I was like, ooh, that
Okay.
one did
Yeah.
not hit well. I had a few moments where I was like, I would have done it differently, but I also, I mean, that's everywhere,
Yeah, that's
everything.
yeah, what are you gonna
Um,
We're
so
not perfect.
I yeah, I would say overall very enjoyable. Um, I definitely I felt kind of bad when I was doing the review because like you do in all reviews, you kind of focus on the quote unquote negatives, the things that didn't
Right.
quite hit. And so I
Exactly.
felt like I felt bad because I'm like, I'm giving a 4-star review here that sounds like a 1.5. And I'm like, no, I promise it really is good. I
Yeah,
just I just because it's good want it to be better.
exactly.
So anyway,
Okay, so who is your favorite character?
ooh, um, his eldest brother is the one that
Oh,
is the most
yeah.
intriguing to me so far.
Eliav.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I like him
Oh,
a lot. Yeah, as well.
it's a bit of a tie between him and Saul's wife, who I just love that actress. I
Okay,
I mean, as a Daredevil fan, I
got it.
am.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's the Kingpin's wife
Yes.
in the Netflix Daredevil series.
You made a good
But
point in your review
yeah.
that
Hmm.
yeah, because I've also seen Daredevil. Of course, I know that actress
Hmm.
played, like you said, the Kingpin's wife.
Hmm.
And you
Yep.
made a good point. You're like, oh, she went from one megalomaniacal king to another. It's like, okay, got it. That's a good point.
Yeah,
Um,
that's kind of her style.
yeah,
Yeah,
I cannot. She grates me so much. I really hate Ahinoam. I'm just gonna be honest.
that's
Like
fine.
first
That's
first
fine.
of all, her I just don't feel like that's a realistic, like honestly, do you think that's realistic that the
Mm.
king's wife
Hmm.
at that period of time, one
Hmm.
of his wives by the way, would
Hmm.
have actually been like that? I struggle to understand how that
Yeah.
makes sense personally.
Okay. Um, when you say been like that,
Like
what specifically?
been in charge of Abner,
Okay.
for example.
Okay.
Like really? His
Okay.
his his chief commander, she would have been giving
Mm-hmm.
him orders?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Really? I'm struggling to understand how that makes sense
I
historically.
yeah, I don't actually know, to be honest.
Yeah.
It never struck me as particularly ahistorical, uh, in that like there have been female rulers and throughout ancient history,
Yeah.
and there have definitely been people who have female queens or something like that who have wielded a ton of power
Even in
behind the
Israel.
scenes. Oh yes, oh
Even
yeah,
in
like
Israel, yeah.
Jezebel
Right.
arguably is the one who wears the pants between her and Ahab.
Exactly. Right.
Or yeah, so I I guess it didn't strike me as wildly implausible. I could see how a person could watch that and go, but it didn't. It struck me as being perhaps at worst unlikely, but within the realm of plausibility.
Yeah, fair enough. Plausible. And I
Hmm.
will I don't want to spoil it, but I will just say this. The dynamics do become more realistic in season 2, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
that's kind of a season 1 weirdness to me.
Yeah.
And also
Okay.
you mentioned it in your season 1 review as well, namely that they just totally ignored the fact of polygyny. Like it just is
Yeah.
completely like, guys,
Yeah.
come on. If you're gonna do a
Yeah.
show about
Yeah.
these people in this period of time, you can't just act like that didn't exist. Like,
Yeah.
which is what they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Again, I don't know what is going to happen in season two or future seasons,
Yeah.
but I, I, it's not so much that I'm sitting here going, "Ooh, I want to see that on screen."
You're
It's
right.
more that I'm just sitting here going, "Boy, like not only is that just like a that's not just window dressing feature in the story.
It's a
It
huge
becomes
plot part.
central, especially to David's story."
Right.
And I feel like you would have a really hard time crafting an honest narrative without that. So, yeah.
Yes. And remind me, because I don't want to spoil anything.
Hmm.
Obviously, so David and Michal, who,
Hmm.
growing up, I always referred to as Michael, right? But they
Hmm. Hmm.
pronounce her name Michal. So
Yeah.
their relationship starts. Remind me before I say anything else, because again, I don't want to spoil it. Where did David and Michal's relationship leave off from your recollection in season 1,
In season one,
from what you saw?
they,
Yeah.
okay. Um, they were making googly eyes at each other and
Okay, that's it.
over the scrolls, um and they had basically come to a place where they had professed their feelings for each other, shall we say,
Okay.
um but they had not like, to my recollection, I don't believe they had like kissed or anything or
Okay,
made it any kind of semi-official.
got it. Okay. Well, I'll just say this
Yeah.
as far I think that they have for my gripe that they just seem to have in season one left that fact, namely polygyny,
Hmm.
just completely absent. I think that the beginning of season two may have wedged a way in, and I'll just leave it there.
Okay.
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see. I don't know. I'm
Okay.
only on season or episode three.
Okay.
So I'll just say this. You said your favorite character is Eliav. I really like Eliav.
Hmm.
Obviously,
Hmm.
he's super warrior masculine
Hmm.
type. He's just
Hmm.
he takes the day on the battlefield type thing.
Yep.
Nobody can beat him. I think it's really awesome. My favorite character though, hands down, is Samuel. I love Samuel. I think that actor did a great job
Yeah.
portraying what a
Yeah.
prophet was probably like. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
so
Like wild and crazy. I mean,
exactly.
like John the Baptist, very much. Yeah.
Yes.
I I got major like wilderness, um, wild man sort of vibes from him, which was fun to watch for sure. Hmm.
Yes. I don't know anything about that actor, but I think he did a great job. I think
Hmm.
my favorite moment was in I don't remember which season it is or which episode it is. Spoiler alert, real quick. It's not really a spoiler alert if you're familiar with the biblical story, but anyway, um, just in case you're not. So Samuel tells Saul that his kingdom is going to be taken away from him because of his sin, and they're in this scene where they're arguing about it, and Saul uh mentions essentially what he does is he's like, "Who are you, prophet, to tell me what
Mm.
authority I can have when you can't even get
Hmm.
your own sons under control?" And this is a little small detail in the story of the Bible where
Yeah.
Samuel's sons actually were unfaithful.
Oh yeah.
They were not good sons.
Mm-mm.
So I mean, we don't know the story. We don't know why exactly, but obviously people will say like, well, he must have been a very good father. Maybe he was neglectful. Maybe he was too busy, whatever. But the point is that Saul took that moment of him being rebuked by the prophet to say, "Who are you
Hmm.
to rebuke me? You've got your house isn't in order," essentially. And
Yeah.
that's a really powerful moment because it's like, wow, yeah, like apparently God still uses a man whose household is let pretty messed up to
Yep.
rebuke the king of Israel. So I just thought that was a really
Yep.
powerful moment.
Yeah, yeah. And what's really interesting to me, and this is not something that the show engages with at all, which they wouldn't, but if you go even further back in Samuel's story to the history of Eli, the prophet who kind of trained him, basically, or the priest who trained him, Eli's sons had the same problem.
Interesting. Yep.
Yeah. And so Samuel watched that
Hmm.
growing up and saw all the negative effects of it
Hmm.
and still struggled to avoid passing on that, so to speak, to the next generation. And that's just yeah, to me that's a powerful example of what I see all the time in counseling. Even when we watch bad things happen and
Hmm.
we say never again or
Hmm.
not to my family, there still is just a gravitational pull that some of these things exert on us. So,
Hmm. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it as well with regard to the show, it's kind of curious that his sons haven't shown up. I wonder if they will.
yeah,
But anyway, that
I don't know.
is an interesting subplot. Well, unless you had anything else you wanted to say about the show, I would just end it by saying it's definitely watch worthy. Highly
Yes.
recommend it. It's not perfect, but
Hmm.
you'll enjoy it, I think.
Finally, we have good Christian television. I mean, The Chosen was has definitely has some really good moments, without a
Sure,
doubt. I'm not
sure.
not trying to demean everything else out there, but yes, that is something I've been waiting for a long time, and am glad to see. So
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, now moving into some more theological topics about our perspectives. Figured we start with a question that was actually submitted for you by a good friend of ours, Jared Kasperi from the channel Refining Exegetics. And he said the following. So I would like to hear more from Spencer about his particular view of how Jesus has transformed, cleansed the cosmos through his death and resurrection. From past convos, he seems to depict quite a dramatic transformation of things, including our own natures, irrespective of man's choice to believe or not. Does he view all mankind as already reconciled to God? And if so, in what sense?
Very good question. And I will start with a couple of short answers and then we'll have to unpack those. Um, so I start with a lot of this is coming from, and it's not just anchored in this one verse, but this is probably the place where it becomes the most exegetically obvious is the wrong word. Direct. Let's put it that way. Is First John 2, 1 through 2, where it says that he himself, meaning Christ, is the hilasmos, often translated propitiation, but I think that's a bad translation. But anyway, he himself is the hilasmos for our sins, and not for ours, and not just for ours, but for the whole world.
Hmm. My
Sorry,
my
I
translation,
should clarify, and not just for us, but for the whole world. My apologies.
yeah, and just so the translation I'm reading, I tend to read the NRSV
Mm-hmm.
UE. Halasmos is translated the atoning sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. So, um, the idea there is that, first of all, to go backwards a bit, hilasmos was all of that word group, hilasmos, hilasterion, all those kind of things, um, hilaskomai, they were all used to translate the phrases in the Levitical law uh, that dealt with the effects and work of atonement, specifically the application of blood as a cleansing or a detergent, as a ritual agent of healing and cleansing. And
Hmm.
so there's that backdrop that I have in mind there, is seeing that when John, who was a Jew who knew these things, it starts talking about atonement. He's talking about the application of blood to cleanse sacred space. And then I go even further back to Genesis and I read through, several scholars have noticed this, that the Genesis creation account is structured like a building of a temple. So the cosmos itself is a temple
Mhm.
and is structured in that way. And so when we look at a phrase in John's gospel, it says, like, he is the atonement or the atoning sacrifice for our sins, and not just for us, but for the whole cosmos. That there is a moment, the way I'm reading that is with all that background intact, and saying, according to someone who knew the Hebrew Bible, they would read this and say, yes, the temple is being cleansed. And not just this one little building, but the whole cosmos. Not
Oh,
just us
interesting.
who are the temple as the body of Christ, but the whole cosmos as a cosmic temple is being
Interesting.
purified from the contamination of sin. And so sacred space is now being made ready for the indwelling of the presence.
Got it. Yeah, that's actually really I appreciate you drawing attention to that language. I'm actually going to share my screen real quick and point something out
Mm-hmm.
here, um, based on what you just said, because you helped me to notice something I hadn't noticed before. So give me just a second.
Sure.
Boom. Okay. So first of all, like you were saying, halasmos, I have
Mm-hmm.
this handy little Septuagint comparison tool in Logos, and it talks
Ah,
about how,
cool.
yeah,
Great.
that was translated as act of atonement, sin expiation, sin offering. Apparently, it also goes into and has some indebtedness, guilt language, and pardon language. Okay, but the key thing I wanted to point out was the way that you made sure to clarify in verse 2 of First John 2, for First John 2 2. The translation
Mm-hmm.
I was reading says, and it's here on the left, He is the atoning sacrifice for our sins, and not for ours only, but also, and then it adds, for the sins
For the
of
sins.
the whole
Correct.
world. But in the
Yes.
but in the LSV over here on the right, it just says what you said, which is he,
For the whole world.
yes, he is the propitiation or atoning sacrifice, halasmos, for our sins, and not only for us. It says ours,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the pronoun,
Mm-hmm.
but also for the whole world. So to make
Right.
the point clear, you're saying that the atoning sacrifice of Jesus wasn't just cleansing human sins, when
Mm-hmm.
he says cleansing our sins, but it was actually
Mm-hmm.
cleansing the Genesis 1 cosmos, creation itself.
Yes. Yes.
Got
Yep.
it. All right, feel free to continue. I just wanted to highlight that.
Sure. So, and then as far as the quite a dramatic transformation of things, including our natures, irrespective of man's choice to believe or not. So, yes, some of this is, and I would say that this is informed, heavily informed by the patristic understanding, but it's not determined by it in the sense of like, I don't go, huh, what does this mean? Let me see what Chrysostom says about it. It's more like I go, okay, this doesn't quite make sense. Here's how I think it makes sense. Let me see what other Christians have always said about this. And then I go back and I go, oh, okay. So these are the dots they're connecting. That makes sense of some of the gaps and fills in the gaps in my knowledge. And so now I feel like I have a more robust understanding of this thing.
Hmm.
Anyway, all that to say, there is a reason why a lot of people read Paul and think that he is a universalist because he says a lot of universal language things like, as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. Or because one has died, all have died. Or the classic one that you and I have gone back and forth on several times in Romans 5:18, that contrasting Adam and Christ, that just as the disobedience of the one man brought condemnation for all men, so the obedience of the one man, Christ, brings justification and life to all men.
Mhm.
And so there's all this universal all, savior
Mhm.
of all language,
Mhm.
like in
Mhm.
First Timothy. And people hear that and they go, oh, well, then it must mean that all people are saved. Pause. Not necessarily. There's a difference between nature and person. So we
Hmm.
can look at human nature and say that is all, and the way that the uh, Hellenistic world, which was Paul's world, saw human nature was as a single organism, like one single human that
An entity.
collect. Yes, 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 like a superorganism. We might say in modern terms, um, one single thing that and and that is why there isn't such a thing as like human nature in the abstract. It has to be instantiated in a person to actually be there. And so it's not like there is a platonic form of human floating out there. It's saying that human nature is embodied in a person, first in Adam, and now in Christ. And that embodiment of human nature is different between the two of them. And so that's what I mean when I say things like there's a dramatic transformation of things, including our own nature. Yes, like Paul says in Colossians, that Jesus has summed up all things in himself, that he has brought all of human nature into his instantiation of that nature. And from that place, everybody who is human is now different.
Got it.
Now, does that mean that everybody is saved or whatever. No, because individual persons still have to activate or participate in that possibility that it is
Mm,
now
mhm.
different with human nature than it was before.
Yep, got it. Understood. So, yeah, and we have talked about this somewhat in depth, I think, for about 4 hours. We have two
Hmm.
recordings in the Law of God group where we go
Yeah.
back and forth on Romans 5 and 6 and these issues. And
Hmm.
I'm not going to derail this now. That could be appearance 3 for you if you'd like. Um, but just clarifying question. So, essentially what you're saying is that the work of Messiah, his death, burial,
Hmm.
resurrection, ascension affected justification, which I know from past conversations you take to mean being put right, essentially this transformation of the human nature that you're talking about. It affected that justification irregardless of the belief of the humans involved, number one.
Hmm.
But that so there's that's a sense of justification. But then there's
Yes.
another sense of justification on your view where
Hmm.
only people who actually are faithful are justified, correct?
Correct.
So
Yes.
essentially there's when we talk about things like reconciliation, redemption, salvation, um, justification,
Hmm.
there's it sounds to me like your view is essentially that there's kind of two flavors of each of those things. Like there's a sense in which through the work of Messiah, all humanity has been saved. All humanity has been redeemed. All humanity has been reconciled. All humanity has been
All,
justified.
all
But
humanity is being saved.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
But then there's this other sense of it, which is contingent on faithfulness.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Just like I think it says in Second Corinthians 5 when Paul says, you know, you have been so God was in Christ reconciling the whole world to him.
Hmm.
And then like the very next verse or maybe two verses later he says, we plead with you, be reconciled to God. So everything you're describing about that kind of like two flavors, so to speak, comes back to a fundamental exegetical commitment, the inaugurated eschatology. The idea that the already not yet is another way of saying that. The idea that things are different, but not yet complete.
In process, in progress.
Hmm.
Got
Hmm.
it. Yeah.
So I think one of the analogies of this is almost like D-Day. So
Okay.
France has been occupied under Nazi rule, and now the something drastic has happened, something really definitive, something that totally changes the tone and texture and dynamics of the entire war has happened with D-Day. But the war is not over. But it's also not the same. It's different.
Got it. Yeah.
So and as the kingdom advances, more and more territory is reclaimed. And to go back to the atonement and the whole cosmos discussion, that the cosmos is being reclaimed. So to say that the cosmos has been cleansed is not to say that everything is now just as clean as it ever was or ever could be.
Right.
It's to say the same thing that happened in the temple, that it was cleansed and then it had to stay cleansed. It had to retain that purity through faithfulness.
Mm. Yeah. It's kind of like the Day of Atonement, where one time, once a year, the high priest would go in and effect atonement for the Holy of Holies.
Right.
But then for the rest of the year, obviously, the other priests got to do their work,
Yes.
right?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Kind of
Yep.
like that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's Hebrews, the language of Hebrews, when the author talks about how that had to happen once every year. Like
Hmm.
there had to be a continual like cosmic recleansing, because the the tabernacle was a mini mini cosmos. It was a microcosm.
Mm,
And so you had to continually cleanse the cosmos over and over and over and over because it was impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to actually take away those sins. They
right.
could do the cleansing of the flesh and the ex and the I want to say external, but I know that carries a lot of baggage I don't want to import, but it cleansed the furniture. I'll say that. It
Okay.
did that, but it didn't take away sins.
Right.
That was something that we had to, even with the Azazel goat ritual, had to be recapitulated over and over and over again. Jesus's sacrifice as both goats did what those things did, but did it once for all.
Mm.
Again, not just for this one space, but for the whole cosmos.
Yeah, all of God's temple creation, if you will.
Yeah, and not just for individual people who said yes, but for all
Mm.
people.
Yep, understood. Yeah, just a quick note on the whole inaugurated eschatology
Mhm.
already but not yet issue. The classic problem with that is just that the lines can get kind of hazy, and
Oh yeah,
we're not
very.
sure if
Yep.
we're underselling it or overselling it, if
Yep.
we're grabbing stuff from the future that we shouldn't be bringing into the present and we should be
Yeah,
locating it.
yeah.
I mean, that's really where the debate centers. It's like, what are we talking about, and um is that actually a reality now? What exactly did happen? Yeah, I'm not going to derail us now, but I think that you've very clearly articulated essentially what you're talking about in response to the question to Jared. Let me just make
Good.
sure. Okay,
Maybe
so you
the
did you
reconcile.
yeah, I was about to say. So
Okay.
I mean, it came up, but yeah, please do speak to that a
Hmm.
little bit more.
Yes, I would say that mankind is reconciled to God.
Mhm. In the body of Messiah, right?
Yes,
Because he summed up all
yes,
things in himself.
yes.
Right.
Humanity as has been reconciled because humanity is now pleasing to God because humanity is embodied by Christ.
Interesting.
Having said that, having said that, they have to participate in the body to not be a cancer
Yeah.
and be and not be cut out. So
Yep. Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. Okay. Got it. All right. So the next topic I wanted to talk about with you is something that you and I have kind of gone around and around the mulberry bush about several times. And
and before you dive too deep into that, is it
yeah,
okay if I just pause and take a quick break and a
absolutely.
bathroom break and stuff?
Absolutely. Pausing now. All right, back from the break. So, like I was saying, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is a subject that we've discussed before, and I think I've already learned from you a couple points, but I would really love to hash it out a little bit more. I view
Hmm.
this as a learning opportunity for me, for us to just kind of dig through this issue because I I'll just put it like this. So we're going to talk about things like God's justice, his wrath, vengeance,
Hmm.
punishment, and with
Hmm.
specific reference to this issue that reoccurs in the biblical narrative about the sins of the fathers being visited upon the sons, and what exactly that means and how that works, and so on and so forth. So let's use this as a launching pad. Again, our good friend Jared Kasperi submitted a question that I think is helpful here. So he asked, does God judicially punish someone because of what someone else did? And so, real quick, just for fun, give me your one word answer.
No.
And frankly, I'm more of the, well, I don't, it seems kind of like it. I don't really know
Yeah.
how not to say, at least sometimes it looks like
Hmm.
that. So, yeah,
Hmm.
so let's talk about it. So first of all,
Sure.
just go ahead and give me kind of your longer answer on this issue and unpack where you're coming from on this.
Right. Okay. So I I would start by saying, and this might feel like a fine nuance, but I do think it is supportable, is a distinction between punishment and consequence. And what I mean by that is like I'll give an example from my daughter. Um, she let me think of a good example of something. She does something wrong that I tell her not to. Like, okay, actually, this is horrible to think about, but it's the only one popping into my head. Um, I tell her, look both ways before you cross the street.
Mm, mhm,
She
mhm.
runs out, gets hurt in some way. God forbid. Did I punish her or was that a consequence?
Yeah, that's obviously a consequence. You didn't punish her.
Exactly.
And I'll add to that, did the person who hurt her, did they punish her? And
Mm-hmm.
it seems like the
Mm-hmm.
answer is no. So anyway, continue.
Exactly. And so I think when we use words like punishment, or especially in the language of the question, judicially punish, which is a very judicial thing, it's a forensic declaration of you are guilty
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I am going to impose a unnatural sentence on you as a result of your guilt.
What,
Um, and
sorry,
go ahead.
an unnatural sentence? What are you saying?
Sure. So by that, I mean something that would not necessarily ordinarily happen on its own kind of steam, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah, like I'm gonna cause you to experience something that is not
Correct.
necessarily what would
Yes.
happen otherwise.
Yes. I'm going to intervene into the quote unquote natural order.
Okay.
And so, again, with my daughter, she tells me, she sasses back and says, I don't want to do what you tell me to. Okay. Like, what are the natural consequences for that? I mean, there's a lack of trust, there's a breach of a relationship, and then the punishment is you need to go to your room. Like as a
Mhm.
really trite example,
Right.
because that is me intervening into what would ordinarily happen already and creating an extra layer of something else needs to happen in order for justice to be done or for you to get the message or whatever the purpose is. That's what I mean by judicial punishment is that imposition.
Yep.
Now,
Got it.
does does God do that to subsequent generations? I think that's a clearly a no. Now, do subsequent generations feel the effects of God punishing the current generation and of and or of past punishments for previous generations? Yes.
Okay, that's a key distinction you just made right there. The effects of past punishments. Okay, but
Mhm.
see that to me, I guess the issue that I have, and we'll just have to go through texts to talk about it,
Sure.
is like the way that it seems like the prophets construe this is that the punishment God is laying upon Israel has reference to both the punishments for what was going on in the
Mhm.
past
Mhm.
and the people in the present. So the
Yep.
effects of the so I guess the thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is how is the effects of the past punishment not still being a punishment?
Good.
I don't get that.
No, very good question because you're right. Like the prophet and I will gladly concede that the prophets do talk to the exile generation, for example,
Hmm.
and say you are being you are receiving the effects, the consequences, the iniquity, whatever it is, of your sins and your father's
Yeah,
sins.
can I bring a text up real quick as
Yeah,
an
please.
example of that?
Hmm.
Um, where'd you go? Ah, here we go. Okay. So this is actually a good example of what you were just talking about and what I was talking about. So in it seems to me anyway. Isaiah
Hmm.
65 verse 6, see, it is written before me, I will not keep silent. This is Yahweh speaking, by the way. I will not keep
Hmm.
silent. I will repay. I will indeed repay into their laps their iniquities and their ancestors' iniquities together, says Yahweh.
Yep.
Because they, now he's referencing it seems at least both groups of people when he says they next, because they offered incense on the mountains, reviled me on the hills. I will measure into their laps full payment for their actions. So their iniquities and their ancestors' iniquities. And when he uses this language of repay, I don't know how to not think punish. Like if
Mm-hmm.
God is saying, I'm going to repay
Mm-hmm.
you for your sin,
Mm-hmm.
I I I just have a brain block that I can't get past that being a punishment.
Got it. Okay. So part of that is looking at this and saying, what happened to those previous generations? Now, they definitely received in themselves um the penalty that was due their their sins. Like,
Okay.
and that could look like a lot of things. That could look like um I'm trying to think of some examples here. It could look like exile from the sacred space, from the temple. It could look like um, them, oh, their families falling apart.
Are you talking
um,
about, just to clarify, you talking about
mhm.
situations where essentially the effects of the father's sins are still felt by the sons? Is that what you're saying?
I'm looking at the previous generation, at the generation of the fathers, and
Okay.
saying what happened to them when they
Okay.
sinned.
Okay.
They did not escape penalty. Like they
Got it.
still received
They were punished.
penalty. Yes, they were. But I don't think that the Bible views punishment as being this like judicial balancing scale of there is a concrete finite amount. Let's call it, X punishment that was due to the father's generation. And God only paid them X minus 10. So now there's a little
Mm,
bit of an imbalance, and we got to get rid of that extra 10 somehow.
on the
So I'm just
sons.
going to add it on the sons.
Hmm.
That is a way too mechanistic, scientific spreadsheet analysis of tzedakah
Okay.
and mishpat.
Okay. So, um, what do you think that repaying the iniquities of the ancestors on the sons means then?
Okay.
Like
That,
what we just read in that
sure,
text, because it
sure.
says that Yahweh says, I'm going to repay their
Mm-hmm.
iniquities into
Mm-hmm.
hold on, let me just read it again so I get it right. I will indeed repay into their laps, this is
Mm-hmm.
the sons' laps, their
Mm-hmm.
iniquities and their ancestors' iniquities together. So if what, and I get your point, like if there's not some kind of tit for tat
Yeah.
retribution going on here
Yeah.
where there's a certain amount that needs to be fulfilled. Well, then what does that mean? What does it mean for God to repay the iniquities of the ancestors into the son's laps?
Yes. I think what it means is that God is saying, um, you will receive the same punishment they did and the punishment for your sins.
Mm.
So for you, it will look worse because you're getting the thing that they got. And now that ongoing effect of continued sinfulness has become such a stench in my nostrils that I am going to leave the temple and abandoning you to the other nations. The covenant curse of
Mm.
Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, all of that, none of that fell on your fathers, but it will fall on you. Not so much because you are so much heinous and so much worse than your fathers, but because that stench has been rising up and
Mm.
up and up, and I'm finally sick of smelling it.
Interesting. Okay. So it's about the form of punishment then, is the point you're making. You're gonna get the form of punishment that they received, you're gonna get that. Oh, and also, your sins are such that now you're gonna get this stuff too.
Yep.
Okay. Got it. And I think there's maybe an example of this, of what you're saying, What's the king's name? Remind me. The super bad king who is like, widespread propagating children sacrificed to demons.
That does not narrow it down more than like half a dozen.
I there's one particular guy who gets called out, and I just am
Ahaz?
no. It starts with an M, I think.
That would be Manasseh.
Manasseh, thank you. So
Okay.
Manasseh story. Hold on, I'm trying to find this passage.
Hmm.
I think it serves the point. Manasseh story about repentance not being enough.
Hmm.
Let me get that text real quick.
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, Second Kings 21, Second Chronicles 23. There's the story about this king, King Manasseh of Judah, who essentially was so wicked. I mean, various things that he did, uh, erected altars to Baal and Asherah in the temple. He practiced things like witchcraft and divination, consulting mediums, sacrificing and permitting the sacrifice of children, offering them in the fire to various Canaanite deities. And there was widespread shedding of innocent blood that,
Hmm.
in the language of the narrative, filled Jerusalem from end to end with the innocent blood. It says this is why I kind of had him in mind because the text says he did more evil than the nations that the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. Okay, like
Oh,
this is why
wow.
he's yeah, he's such
More
a
than the Amorites.
right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so he apparently brought more wickedness into the land of Israel through his leadership, or
Hmm.
permitted it or whatever, than there was in Canaan that caused God to destroy Canaan. So hugely negative figure in the story of the Bible. And here's the point. Manasseh entreated the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God
Hmm.
of his ancestors. In
Hmm.
fact, there's an apocryphal prayer of Manasseh that some
Yes.
believe is actually his prayer. Regardless of whether that's true or not, the text definitely says that he
Yeah.
repented. But here's the key point. Um, the people continued to sacrifice at the high places. There was still a lot of syncretism, and God essentially said, "Sorry, yeah, I understand that you've repented, but you're this the consequences of this sin are still going to happen. Like this,
Hmm.
your the repentance that you're demonstrating yourself, Manasseh, and that is happening in the kingdom. It's not enough. Like there's still going to be punishment that comes upon Israel for your sins."
Yeah.
Um, which
Yeah.
I guess just kind of served the point you were making a moment ago about how things had gotten. Your take on Isaiah is that things had gotten so bad that there's just the punishment's coming, and it's going to be even worse than your father's experienced.
Yes. Although Isaiah 65 is likely post-exilic. Um, and I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the text critical weeds there
Hmm.
about that, but I mean, I'm fairly confident that 65 was at least after the exile, perhaps even after the return from exile.
Okay.
So when God is saying that, he's not proleptically saying, I will let the Babylonians take you away. He's saying something closer to like, look, I did that. I let the Babylonians take you away for the purpose of hopefully to get you to repent, to come back to me, to see the error of your ways, to see how much you need me to be a part, to be your king and not trust in chariots and horses and everybody else.
Mm.
Um, and also for that matter, to go back to Jeremiah, to give the land its Sabbaths, to rest from all the wickedness that you have defiled it with.
Oh
So
yeah.
that
Oh.
time has come, has passed, and so now I'm bringing you back, but you're still doing the same thing. It's
Mm.
not the same thing. It's not quite Manasseh level, but it's the same basic stuff: syncretism, idolatry, not keeping yourself holy. Like that's the whole point of Ezra and Nehemiah, is that, well, not the whole point, but it's one of the major points of Ezra and Nehemiah, is that uh, the remnant did not keep themselves set apart from the nations, that they were, intermarrying and blending with the nations all over the place. And and so God still wants them to follow all those things, but they continue to
Mm,
re-engage the sins of their fathers over and over again. And I think
got it.
that's the really significant piece of the sins of the fathers and the sons and all that, is that
Okay.
at no point is God ever talking about that in the context of saying, okay, the sons are innocent, but the fathers are guilty. And so therefore, I'm going to take the guilty and put it on the innocent. At no point. And in fact,
Yeah.
Ezekiel 18:33, he
Mhm.
explicitly repudiates that and says, I will never do that.
Okay, I want to press into that a little bit, but before I do, I just want to clarify something I said a moment ago. So, with regard to the story about Manasseh,
Yeah.
uh, the text I had in mind was Second Kings 23:25 through 26. And
Okay.
I'm gonna go there real quick. Second Kings
Hmm.
23:25. So it's actually Josiah who was repentant. And here's what it says: Before him there was no king like him who turned to Yahweh with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. And by the way, I just want to foot stomp a good brother of mine, Matthew Jansen, from forget the episode, but he's a recent guest on the Theology Experience. He
Hmm.
pointed this out to me. This is the only match for the Shema in the entire Tanakh, by the way. Um,
Huh.
the one for one match with all heart,
Oh,
soul, and
one for
might.
one. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I was gonna say, because I swear there are other partial matches, but
That
okay,
yeah, I
continue.
meant the one that like repeats that verbiage of heart, soul, and might.
Yeah.
According to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. And then the next verse says, still Yahweh did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath by which his
Yep.
anger was kindled against Judah because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. That
Yep.
that's insane. Like there no greater demonstration of repentance could be given than Josiah.
Hmm.
It's essentially what verse 25 says. And then verse
Yep.
26 says, and yes, still that wasn't enough.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
that's rough.
Yes, it
Well,
is. Yeah. And now, however, I do want to be clear, and this is
mhm,
where we go back to the trauma informed lens. I have
mm,
had many people that I've encountered, and I myself have wrestled a lot with the whole question of like, what is the unforgivable sin? Have
mm,
I committed the
mm,
unforgivable sin? Am
mhm,
I, beyond saving? Am I, you know, it is it too late for me, essentially?
mhm,
God here in this space is saying, yes, Judah, it is too late for you
mm,
when you consider it from the perspective of averting exile,
mm.
averting wrath, averting covenant breach. You have gone so far on the other direction that you cannot go back to across the line to repair the covenant. The covenant is broken, full stop. Now, does that mean that Josiah is now guilty? No, Josiah is still innocent. Josiah is not counted as guilty because of Manasseh, but the
Of
covenant
yeah.
is still broken.
Mm.
And
See, that's the hard. Okay, I'm really struggling with this. Help me, okay? Because
sure.
you say Josiah is not guilty. I,
Hmm.
I I think what you mean is like him as an individual, he is still going to be accounted as righteous before God. But
Yes.
insofar as he is a member of the nation of Israel who is about to be punished by God,
Hmm.
I
He will
mean,
still participate in that punishment. Now, he did not, as it turns out, because it happened after his time. But the point being that, and that itself is part of the
oh yeah,
mercy
that
of
that's a
God,
good point. Yeah,
saying, yeah, saying like I will show Hesed,
to
loyal
you,
love is,
yeah.
yeah, to you because you are faithful. You were
Mm.
faithful, and I will forgive those sins. I will pardon those sins, set them aside. I will send them away. Those are all analogs of forgive. Um, However, I will not clear the guilty.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a really good point because I was thinking of Josiah as actually being subject to the punishment. So
No.
that helps clarify that he wasn't. Okay, good.
Hmm.
So, but this leads to the thing I want to zoom in on with you now, which is so Ezekiel 18, classic. The sin, God's not going to put to death the son for the sins of the father. He's not going to put to death the father for the sins of the son. Okay.
Hmm.
However, that's great, but what about all the times where sons are being put to death for the sins of their fathers? Let's be honest about that.
Like Korah.
Yeah, or Achan. Um,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
let's talk about, for example, here's one passage we've discussed, but in First Chronicles 21, which has a parallel in Second Samuel 24, there's this story about King David sinning greatly by taking a census of Israel. God's
Mm.
angry.
Hmm.
God sends a prophet and says, "Here, you got three
Hmm.
options. Pick your option." David picks his option, and the option is that a plague's going to go, and 70,000 Israelites die. And it's like,
Yeah.
what? I mean, David's the one who sinned in this narrative. For first of all,
Right.
the punishment is supposed to be about David somehow. David's supposed to be being punished, but 70,000 Israelites die. It's like,
Hmm.
what the? I'm just trying to understand how I
Yeah.
get we can read Ezekiel 18 and we can be like, yeah, God's not going to put to death the son for the sins of the father, except all the times where that happens. Like, help me understand what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to start by saying this is not an easy answer. This is not something that's like, oh, well, if you can't see it, then you're just a reprobate who can't read the Bible or something like that. This is really difficult stuff.
Yeah.
And I think wrath and judgment is a really delicate subject in the Bible in general. And we have so much baggage. It's so like, I feel like every time I talk about it, I have to do double work. I have to both deconstruct bad and reconstruct good at the same time.
Mm.
And so it always sounds a bit like mental gymnastics. And I acknowledge that right off the bat.
Hey,
But I
not
think
all
it's
gymnastics are
because
bad.
sure, sure, yeah. Yeah. I think it's because there's so much clearing of the air that we have to do
Mm.
with wrath and judgment. We
Okay.
keep having to say yes and no all at the
Mm-hmm.
same time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I would highlight is what I started to say earlier about the unforgivable sin and those kind of things is that wrath in the context of like covenant curse is a collective thing. It's what happens when the long suffering runs out. And then when that gets brought, that is a very blunt instrument. Like I mentioned Korah,
Yep.
a hole opens up and the whole clan,
Yeah.
although not all of them, because the sons of Korah continue
Right.
afterwards and
Right.
write
Right.
psalms. So there's some ambiguity there.
Yeah.
But in any case, people who we would consider to be innocent are probably part of that experience. Let's just presumptively assume that. A hole opens up, they fall in, and they go alive down to Sheol, it
Mm-hmm.
says. Or Achan, same sort of
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
They are all um, they all receive that uh, consequence
Yeah,
because the
they're all
head of the
stoned to death.
yeah the head of the
I mean,
house
yeah.
yeah the head of the house is the one who sins, and they participate in the consequence of that sin. Same thing with Israel in the exile. I mean, I think it's straining credulity for me to say that there was no righteous people in Israel at the time of the exile,
Mm.
or for that matter, that the exile only touched or affected the unrighteous, that the righteous were somehow divinely spared. And I think that Daniel is evidence number one of that. That
Right. Because
even
he went into the
people,
exile. Right.
yeah, exactly. So, and Jeremiah, for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
did
Mm-hmm.
as well. So, anyway, all that to say, the point is that when God's wrath falls, it is the rain that falls on the just and the unjust alike. It is a hurricane that sweeps up, that is like decreation. It
Yeah.
sweeps up everybody and everything, unless you have done the thing that he says is the provision to protect yourself from that wrath, which could be like in the case of Noah getting on the ark. In
Mm.
Clearly, Josiah's repentance was not enough. um, or in the case of Jesus, when he comes and declares wrath is coming, and he says, "Who warned you to flee from that?" He says, not in these words, but he functionally says, "I am the ark. Get on me, and that will save you from the wrath to come." So again, it's looking at wrath as being this like thing that happens when the sinfulness, the wickedness, the evil becomes so bad that God cannot let it go and be just. He has to step in and take care of it.
Mm.
And when he does, he is chosen to use a very blunt instrument to do that. But he
Mm.
always gives a provision for rescue, if not rescue from suffering, not always, at least rescue in a long-term sense of, I will give you rescue on the other side. That's the remnant of Judah.
Mm.
Um, so to go back to your that's the bigger picture of
Yeah,
wrath.
right. Hmm.
To go back to your question of what about when the sons do actually die? I think it's in that context
Mm.
to say that the the thing that happened was so egregious, was part of the buildup that got to a point where the stench was so bad that he said, "I'm done." And people get swept up in that. But there's always a rescue, or at least an offer, a hope, a
Mm.
possibility of redemption and restoration and all that on the other side. Because the whole point of wrath is to repair, to break the bones so that they can be repaired,
Mm.
like it says in Psalm 51. So,
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So to kind of recontextualize what we're talking about now with Jared's initial question, I guess my question for you is so let's just take an example. Okay.
sure.
Um, the flood generation,
Okay.
all the
Okay.
people who died in the flood, uh, were they being judicially punished? Like, I mean, do you understand my question? Because like
Yes.
Jared's question is someone else being judicially punished for this? Does God judicially punish someone for the sins of other people?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
at the scenario where
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading about God destroying essentially all humans that exist except for those outside of the ark, or except for those in the ark. And I'm thinking this is obviously a judicial punishment. So yes,
Is it though? So judicial punishment has to be unpacked.
okay,
Um, Whenever you say the word judicial, I think of a courtroom. So I'm looking at guilty and innocent, and people presenting evidence and saying, this is, which by the way is not just a modern idea. That's all throughout like the whole divine council
right.
narrative, throughout the Psalms and the prophets, where God is saying, uh, defend yourself if you can. And that's the whole point of the Hasatan, is the accuser,
The
who is,
prosecution.
yes, exactly, exactly. So that's what I think of when I think of judicial
Okay,
sentence.
I just think of judgment. Like that's okay, that's where it's from. I just think of
See, I think that's something different.
okay, you got to help me understand this because it just looks to me like
I think wrath and judgment are, yes, they flow out of a judicial proclamation of Yahweh saying to Israel, for example, or the flood generation, the 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 sound of the blood of the innocents has risen. I cannot ignore it anymore. I have to cleanse the land. I have to wash it clean, or
Hmm.
else I will not be just.
Hmm.
And so, what he's doing in those moments is not putting every single human being on trial and saying, defend yourself if you can.
Hmm.
What he's doing is saying, the outcry is so big that I have to bring a flood of justice. Now, anyone who gets on the ark will be spared that flood of justice.
Just
If you
like
do, yeah,
just like to bring another hot button issue with
sure.
Canaan. If people
Mm-hmm.
like Rahab got on the Ark of Israel, if you will,
Yeah.
then they would be spared. I
Yes,
guess. I
exactly.
guess.
Yeah. And that's exactly why when they go into Canaan, they're supposed to, well, first of all, they're not supposed to proactively go to a city unless God has specifically designated that.
Right.
They're not supposed to proactively go to a city and take it out. They're supposed to just go through, and then as they go through, when they encounter a city, be able to offer them terms of surrender.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if they do, if they refuse, if they repudiate all the illicit practices and the child sacrifice and the blood drinking and everything else, then they will be on the ark and
Hmm.
they will be
Hmm.
spared.
Hmm.
Like it's not ethnic cleansing.
Right. Right.
it's
Yeah.
it's cleansing certain practices from the earth. And I think that is true in the case of Noah and the flood. That the Nephilim
Hmm.
stuff was happening,
Yep.
and God said, "This is unconscionable. I it's all over the earth. It is so permeated the whole earth, or the whole land. Actually, is probably a better translation there. That I have to wipe this practice out completely, and the way to do that is to wipe out all memory of it.
Yeah.
So they're all harem.
Yeah. Got it. Okay.
I don't see that as a judicial sentence of individual people.
Okay. I.
I see that
It's.
as decreation
Yeah. Yeah.
and recreation.
Okay. I guess I just struggle to see how it's not. So, I mean, on a literal technical level, it seems inescapable to me that there are sons being put to death by God because of the sins of their fathers. In the case
But
of both Noah,
mhm,
the
mhm,
flood, in the case of
mhm,
the land of Canaan, just on a technical, literal level, I
right,
don't know how to escape that. It obviously is true. Help me understand how that
but
isn't
not
true.
declared guilty.
Yeah, yeah, right. They're not being so I guess one way to get at this honestly is to ask if God's uh salvific mercy could be
Mhm.
extended even to such people. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like
Yes,
there's
that's the
theological
whole point of the dialogue before Sodom.
yes, but I'm talking about post-death right now, actually.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
actually
Well, okay, great,
I'm at,
great. Yes, good question. I think that is the natural next question.
right.
Yes, I think that's what Peter is talking about in Second Peter 3.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, it's really fascinating. That's a great rabbit trail
Mm-hmm.
to talk about. But I mean
Mm-hmm.
that actually, first of all, exegetically from First Peter 3, where he talks about going into the place of the where the spirits are in
Mm-hmm.
prison, and he
Mm-hmm.
literally talks about essentially offering the gospel to them. Um,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
uh, Yeah, I mean that would certainly help this issue a lot.
Yep.
Not that
Yep.
I'm trying to just feel comfortable about it, but it would
Mm-hmm.
certainly help if we can understand that, hey, God,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reasons, we don't necessarily understand them all, he had to work this
Mm-hmm.
way extremely harshly. Yes, putting children and women and all that to death, but in his sovereign plan, there was going to be an opportunity for them later. I mean,
Right.
that's the view, and it definitely helps.
Yes. That's I, that's exactly where I land. I
Okay.
do think it is there is a possibility and a hope of for well, like Paul says, of delivering over for the destruction of the flesh and the salvation of the soul.
Oh, fascinating.
So
Yeah, First Corinthians
if
5.
yeah, if the life in the flesh is such an impediment to the soul being saved, then the flesh has to go.
Hmm, interesting. Okay.
then
Well,
then body and soul are separated so that soul can be potentially, of course, saved outside of the body.
yeah, so that you can get essentially resurrection of the body, even though you were destroyed the first time, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, super fascinating stuff. Well, I think that's a helpful place to go on this subject. I guess one other, so okay, I guess I do have to ask you just on an exegetical perspective because we've talked about this before, but in the story about David with the sin of the census and the
Mm-hmm.
70,000 Israelites who die as a result of that. Um, Help me unpack the way that you think about that because when I
Okay.
when I read that, I think that I'm supposed to be reading David being punished.
Okay.
First, like I'm supposed to be thinking, oh, David messed up, he's being punished right now.
Mm-hmm.
But but what is his punishment? I mean, like he 70,000 other people die. Why didn't he die? You understand?
Yeah.
Like how do you
Yeah.
think about this?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, First off, in the A&E world, plague was considered to be demonic.
Mm,
Like Reshef, Dever, all those kind of like Canaanite deities that are viewed as being the agents or the uh, trying to think of the word, the effective aid hand of the plague, so to
mm,
speak.
okay.
And so when we talk about a plague coming on Israel, what I see when I try to look at it through ancient eyes is the people reading that and writing that thinking Yahweh is here to protect us from all the nations and all these demonic entities that are ruling the nations, and he stopped protecting us. He
Mm-hmm.
opened the door and let them come in and ravage our his people and our house. And
Okay.
now and that role that the role that the king does is very Adamic, just like he was supposed to work and keep
Mm,
the
mm,
garden, which is the same word that's used in the priestly narrative about guarding the tabernacle to keep impurity from coming into it. So that's the king's role, was to guard, to protect, to keep the people, to be their shepherd, to keep the wolves at
right.
bay.
Mm,
Exactly.
mm-hmm.
And when he sins, he fails in that.
So
That
the wolves
failure
get in.
exactly
Mm,
affects the sheep.
mm,
Now, if he is a good shepherd, if he cares about the sheep and he sees these sheep die, then that will that will really hurt him if he's a good shepherd. And we have every reason to believe that David was,
got it.
because A, he was a shepherd to begin with, and that's kind of his thing. B, he was a man after God's own heart, and C, I mean, just look at how he responded when, after Bathsheba, he prostrated himself before God to be able to hopefully be able to keep his son from dying. So
Oh, that's
David is
another.
very deeply, Yeah, it is. Yeah, another sons and fathers
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. And
Yeah,
it's not only is it an example of the son father thing, it's also an example of repentance not being enough.
right. Yeah,
But anyway,
repentance is necessary but never sufficient.
that's helpful actually. That's actually really helpful when you put it in those terms. It doesn't
Hmm.
solve all of the issues for sure because
Hmm.
like the military language, the fact that I'm in the military and the way that you're
Hmm.
describing it, I'm thinking like imagine if a general
Yeah.
um wanted to teach his subordinate commander a lesson and
Hmm.
you know I mean, I'm just trying to construct an
Yeah.
analogy here, but
Yeah.
like, imagine there's a camp of this subordinate
Hmm.
commander out here with 70,000 people in it,
Hmm.
and in order to teach this subordinate commander a lesson, this general removes protection from one side of this
Hmm.
fortress so that
Hmm.
the enemy can come and destroy those 70,000 people. And he's like, "See, learn your lesson." Like, that's weird. Like,
Yeah.
um.
I I am not gonna lie. It is not how I would want to do it. Really.
Yeah.
And now I will say this. First of all, the actual number is up to the enemy hordes, not God.
Yeah, good point. Hmm.
So that's one thing I would throw
Yep.
out there. It's not like God said, okay, how many is going to be enough?
Mm.
70,000.
Okay.
So, and that's a theme we see even in the exile, where uh, Isaiah 47, I think it is, where God talks to, through the prophet, talks to Babylon and says, you went beyond the brief. Yes, your brief was to go take Israel, but on the aged and the young, you made your yoke exceedingly heavy.
Mm.
That was on you.
Mm.
And so that's a
Oh
part of
yeah,
the theme of wrath
that's a
and
good point.
judgment is that when God opens up the door, the gate, whatever, and lets the plague or whatever it is flow in, he still holds them accountable for what
And
they do.
the effect is not necessarily what God actually intended.
Bingo.
That's a really good point.
Bingo.
Hmm.
So that's how I see David there, is that David is a good shepherd who cares for his sheep, who was told quite clearly over and over, like it's explicit in Exodus 30, for example, don't do this. Um, and he gets incited by Satan, if we're going to follow Chronicles,
Right.
to do this, and he submits and does it, despite being told by his Abner, I believe it is, saying, "Whoa, what are you doing? This is a bad idea." And he goes, "Nah, I got this. I'm good." Like he had every chance,
Hmm. Hmm.
and he still said, "I'm going to do this." And so God says, "If you wouldn't listen to that, all those other things, maybe you'll listen to this." Okay,
Interesting.
I'm
Yeah.
stepping back.
The way you put that is an interesting reminder of something Jesus said in I think it's in John, where it's something to the effect of if they wouldn't listen to the law
Mm-hmm.
of Moses, they're not going to listen
It
to
went.
this. They're not listening to me. They're not going to listen to this. But
Yep.
I was just reminded of that when you said that.
Yeah, they wouldn't even listen if someone came back from the dead.
Right.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, right. And they didn't.
No. Yep.
Um, hmm. I don't know exactly where to take it. I think that so first of all, we only have about 30 minutes left.
Yeah.
So I think this is actually a pretty natural place to
I
transition
think
into
so.
the final topic that I wanted to get with you.
Sure.
And it's actually interesting how interrelated some of these things are because you and I
Oh
recently
yeah.
had
Hmm.
had some brief discussion about political issues
Yeah.
on your
Hmm.
Facebook page.
Yep.
Two things come to mind. First, the interrelation of the United States military, of which I'm a member, the interrelation of the
Hmm.
United States military with overt Christian themes. And we're going to
Hmm.
get into a video and we'll talk about it, and that'll be clear in a minute. But that concept of the connection between divine, authority or blessing or involvement or whatever,
Hmm.
and the military. That's the first thing.
Hmm.
And then the second thing was we got to talking about modern policy in the United States of America, and the issue of abortion came up. And I made an analogy. I drew a parallel between
Hmm.
modern Democratic, when I say Democratic, I mean the Democratic Party,
Yeah.
modern party platform with regard to abortion. I made a connection to the Canaanites uh, that we talked about earlier with regard to
Hmm.
child sacrifice. And
Yeah.
you and I seem to view things very differently on those things. So I'd love to just spend the next few minutes
Sure.
unpacking that a little bit. Because yeah,
Okay.
I'm sure you've noticed I tend to be politically conservative. And
Hmm.
I I've noticed you don't tend to view things the same way as I do. So I guess the first let's start here. I do want to watch that video and I want to talk about that video in particular. However, let's start here. Help me understand your general perspective when it comes
Uh-huh.
to you as a conscious follower of Jesus, how you view politics and your relation to
Got
it.
it. Okay. Wow, this is going to be a big one. First thing is I would also classify myself as conservative, but the conservative that is out there right now, or what is called conservative, I do not consider conservative.
Okay,
I
understood.
consider it authoritarian,
Okay.
populist, and or authoritarian. Um, and that to me is very, very different than like Reagan conservatism.
Okay.
Um, so that's one thing I would
Sure.
clarify. And then as far as like between the church and the state, my position is very big and broad and is not very specific on, if someone says, well, what about this? Would you do this? Is this
Mm,
good? I say, you need to have a very close, trusted spiritual advisor who is in some ways also responsible for your soul
mm,
to walk you through those tough cases
mm. Okay.
because every case is going to have unique needs, and the goal is to be faithful in whatever situation you find yourself. And that is unique to every person and every situation. So my comments are very broad and very vague, and that is a feature, not a bug.
Mm,
So,
okay.
anyway, having said that, I always have a strong conviction that the church should not be in the business of state power,
Okay.
that the church is there to create cultural systemic change and is not there. And the main way in which that is done should not be with the levers of political power. Um, Now, does that mean that no Christian should get involved in government? Absolutely not. Or the military? Absolutely not. What it does mean is that stepping into that sphere creates a serious tension of faithfulness,
Mm,
of what it means to be faithful in both of those contexts. The temptations and the allegiances and all of the things that you are supposed to do are come really, really close to serving two masters. And so, does that mean you can't be faithful there? No. Does that mean that it will be a lot harder? Yes.
mm,
Now, harder in different ways. Everyone has their cross to bear.
right.
That's not the, but that's the point though, is it's a cross,
Right.
not, not, okay. I'm tempted to say not an M16, but I also understand how that can be heard improperly. So it is a cross.
Mm,
I'll just say that.
mm. Okay. So, noted. I guess let me just say this and then get your response and then we'll get to the video.
Mhm.
My essential political philosophy is can be summarized as follows. There is no such thing as the non-intersection of politics and religion. Number one.
Hmm.
That just doesn't exist. Like
Fair.
there,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
politics is downstream of your religious beliefs. End of story. Like
Hmm.
there's no world where you can have those two things separate.
Yeah.
That's
There's
the
no
first thing.
neutral ground there.
Right. They
Yeah.
necessarily intersect. That's point number
Yes.
one. And then
Yes.
number two is I believe strongly that God is the God of all nations, and that
Hmm.
that entails by biblical revelation, but also just kind of philosophically, that all nations are beholden to his law.
Hmm.
So all nations should conform their laws to his law. Like that's
Okay.
point number two. If God is the God of all nations should conform their laws to his law. In fact, we can read that he expects them to, and when they don't, he punishes them and deals with them. I
Hmm.
mean, that's kind of a huge part of the story of the Bible. So
Hmm.
as a modern American, I think God is the God of this nation. It's only a question of whether we are going to acknowledge that or not. And so when topics like Christian nationalism come up, and I'm fully aware that people would say that what I just said is totally Christian nationalist, and I'm like, sure, whatever, okay. Um, like
Yeah. Let's define terms, but
this
yes.
this nation this nation should be Christian. It shouldn't
Hmm.
be not Christian. I don't understand how this is not like how is this a debate? It shouldn't be not Christian. Like what are you saying? I don't even
Hmm.
get it. Like
Hmm.
to be honest, when I say that again, God is the God of all nations, they should conform their laws to his law. I believe that the God that exists is the God of Jesus.
Yep.
In end of debate. What are we even debating about, you know? Help me understand.
Sure. Yeah. I guess in general, I don't disagree on the broad spectrum. I might just perhaps disagree on the application of that. So
Okay.
I I would certainly agree with you that there is no neutral morality.
Okay.
That your morality is dictated by your belief in transcendent things, however one wants to define that, whether
Hmm.
that's a structural religion and God with a certain name, or whether it's the like a more enlightenment deist, like law of nature, kind of thing, or whatever it is, that your morality is downstream of your metaphysics
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, I am with you on that.
Okay.
Um, I think the difference though is when you are taking things that are and sorry, actually let me add one more thing. And I certainly think and agree with you that God's way is best,
Hmm.
that he is in charge of all nations
Hmm.
including ours, and that his way is always going to be best,
Hmm.
and that we should, as much as possible, on both the individual and the corporate level, orient ourselves toward that way and
Hmm.
try to follow and walk that way.
Okay.
I'm with you there. The diff Where I start to get really not just uncomfortable, but I feel like it borders on, well, blasphemy,
Hmm.
um, is when the goals of the state and the goals of the church or God are conflated.
Okay. Yeah.
When we say something like, um, it's so let me give maybe as much of a concrete example as I can. Um, if a if a state is going to say, okay, we want to have a more just society, so
Hmm.
and we think that the Christian ethic is the most just way to do that.
Hmm.
Now, a state has other commitments, not just simply the highest moral commitment. They do have that, but they have other commitments too. Like, for example, um, commit a social contract with the people of this is the government we have designed. We have designed a government that is a representative democracy that people have a say in, and they genuinely can be able to affect change through these levers and mechanisms that we have agreed are the way that we are going to operate.
Okay.
Now, does that mean that because of this higher goal, we
Mm,
erase all of that?
that's a good question.
No, no,
Okay, and you say
maybe.
no. Interesting.
And where I say Christian nationalism comes in is when that happens.
Oh, interesting. See, this is yeah. So I definitely am like the higher priority supersedes the lower one.
Ultimately, it does in a sense. Well,
There's really two things going on
ultimate,
here.
yeah,
And I don't want to lose sight of the first one, so I want to note it while you
yeah, please.
figure out the second one. Is the because I think you're absolutely right in both being suspicious of, accusing of, um, when a nation co-ops
Mm-hmm.
the holy goal of
Mm-hmm.
God and the church,
Mm-hmm.
it just in order to smuggle in its actual goals, like we
Right.
saw with, for example, Nazi Germany.
Yes.
And so I totally get that. I don't want to lose sight of that. I just wanted to note that real quick that yeah, totally. Any nation that is genuinely Christian wouldn't do that. Like
Right.
because part of following his law is not bearing his name in vain,
Mm-hmm.
not saying, "Hey, I have the authority to do essentially whatever I want to do
Mm-hmm.
because I have his
Mm-hmm.
name," and mask over my actual ambitions with his name.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
agreed with you there. But anyway, the second thing was that you're going to give a concrete example of
Yes. Um. Of.
might have lost
Oh
it.
boy. Yeah. I
Sorry.
think I might have. I think I might have.
I think I lost it
Um.
too. That's okay. Oh, no, I remember. Hierarchy of priority
Oh,
is
thank you.
yes.
Thank you. Yes, yes. So hierarchy of priority. Um, yes, to say it's higher is to say it's more important. And we
Mm,
should, when they conflict, place more emphasis on this than that. It
okay.
is true.
Okay.
Having said that, does that mean we get rid of that? No, there's a difference.
Okay.
So here might be an example. My wife and my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I have a responsibility to both. I
Mm-hmm.
have a duty to both. I have moral obligations to both. What about when they conflict or
Okay, yeah.
are in tension? Let's put it that way, rather than conflict. Um, there's lots of different ways to resolve that. One way is to say which one matters more. Maybe I'll just say for argument's sake, my wife.
Okay.
Okay. Then I will follow her and say, I don't care what impact it causes you, daughter.
Mm,
Doesn't matter. She's higher, you're lower. I love you, but not this much. Done.
okay.
Or I could say, I have duties to both.
Okay.
And I will, of necessity, have to sacrifice in certain cases and with very great fear and trembling, have to sacrifice
Mm,
certain
mm-hmm.
aspects of
Mm-hmm.
this while retaining the core that makes this what it is while fulfilling this.
Fair enough. I get the metaphor. I get the analogy. I guess my general response to that right now, real world with regard to America, is just that it seems to me that we don't actually have an obligation to a secular democracy that is going to oppose God's law. Like we don't actually have an obligation to it. Like we have an obligation
Interesting.
to we have an obligation to God and his law. And this thing right here is has become an enemy to that. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
something that um can coexist at a certain point? Like that's the real question is
Okay,
can we actually have them both at the same time or not?
let me take the that premise and
Yeah.
play it out in the case of the early church.
Okay.
They're in the Roman state,
Yeah.
run by Caligula at one point, and
Yeah.
Nero at another point. If we're going
Hmm.
to look at any state and say contrary to God's law,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's a fair example. How did the early Christians
Yeah.
conceive of their obligations? And Paul in Romans 13 even says, obey the emperor,
Yep.
literally obey
Yes.
Caligula.
Yes. Yep.
And I, and Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Now, that was either Augustus or Germanicus. I forget which one of the two. Um, yeah. So
Hmm.
there is still, I admire and can understand the pietistic impulse of the highest the highest thing first always.
Hmm.
I i get that, but I just don't think that erases everything below it.
So,
And the way I look at the early church and the way they played it out was they still lived within and live at
yes.
peace with all men. They
Yes.
still lived within the social structure and confines and state governance of the Roman Empire that was highly antithetical to God's law. And they did not seek political power or political means as the means by which they would reform that place. Now, they still did. It took several hundred years, like at least three or four, to
Hmm.
get there, but they did it purely, completely from the ground up, not from the top down.
Yeah. So lots to say. We only have 10 minutes left, and I want to get to that video before long, but I'll just say this in brief. I think
Yeah.
that the key is that there's a difference between being a subject of the Roman Empire
Yeah.
and being a citizen of the United States.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
and and it has and also to just briefly speak to your construal of certain political realities today as authoritarianism. See, that word just doesn't bother me, and let me explain why. Because for example, in the Proverbs, it talks about the king's responsibility being to
Mm-hmm.
wield authority for the purpose of ensuring that God's law is informed. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that the obligations of people to either affect their how they are going to affect their nation, seek the well-being of their nation, for example, and Jeremiah talks about that. It depends
Mm-hmm.
on the nation we're talking about and what your role within that nation is. Like
Yep.
today, we have the ability as disciples of Yeshua to be in political power, to
Mm-hmm.
seek for God's law to be enacted in this nation. Like I don't know how that doesn't immediately entail an obligation to do so. Um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, just a quick thought on that.
And I don't think I disagree that people can be in power. Obviously, I that was the preamble at the
Yeah, yeah.
beginning. And I also don't think that I would disagree that they can then try to shape the country as they see fit, as they according to their moral principles
Yes.
by which they were elected. But
Mm,
again, this goes back to the conservative versus authoritarian approach that
sure.
I would distinguish between.
Okay.
Because, first of all, the verse you quoted is about kings. Like, just like it is different between
Yeah,
Rome
right.
and America, it is also different between a monarchy and a democracy. So
True. Yeah,
the
I
assumptions there are like the king has the capability to make that unilateral top down thing. We don't.
okay.
That's not how we have structured our country. And so,
Okay.
as a, to me, true, to me, true conservative, I want to conserve. I want to keep the structure we have. I don't want to upend the structure we have. I want to stay
Okay.
with work within that to create more just, more equitable, more good, more righteous outcomes. But I do not wish to overthrow the structure. There's the authoritarian part, either from the top down, authoritarian, or bottom up, populist. I don't want to do either one of those.
Okay.
I want to stay within the structure and then create good out of that.
I get it. I guess we could wrap around this forever.
Yeah.
I guess one question I would have for you is I get the point you're making about conserving the structure as it was designed through the social contract. That's a key
Mm-hmm.
part of American political
Oh,
philosophy,
yeah.
going back to the founders.
Huge.
I totally understand that. But what about when that social contract is actually conducive to lawlessness? Like, for
And
example,
they're great.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say there are mechanisms within the contract for that.
Depends on who you ask, Spencer. Because if you take most of the modern Democratic Party's perspective, then no,
Mm-hmm.
there isn't, because we should never have the law of God in the government.
Mm. Mm. Well, if we get, well, I mean, when I say mechanisms, I mean things like the ability to vote people who share our beliefs, who
Hmm.
share our view of the what a just society looks like.
Sure.
We have that capacity to vote those people in power. And again, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
What I have a problem with is upending the system that exists, like using that power to undermine the both the state and I think in the process the church.
Fair
So,
enough. Okay, I'll just say this and then let's get to the video. I am okay with certain more radical solutions when it seems as though the system is corrupted to the point where it is actually going to make it impossible otherwise
mm-hmm.
to actually instantiate lawfulness. So I'll
Mm,
just say that, and I just
mm-hmm.
I view that as basically where we have been. So, with that being said, um, let's
Much
get to
bigger discussion. Yes.
exactly. Let's get to the video because I think that you really didn't like this. I saw it and I was like,
Nope.
eh. It's like
Yeah.
I saw it and I was like, I mean, that's cool. But you actually called it blasphemy. So let's watch it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about it for as much time as you have left.
Sure.
All right. So just for the viewers, I'm sure that most people are going to know this, but Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, he is in fact in my personal chain of command. He is the Secretary of War. I'm a member of the United States Army, so he's all the way up at the top when it comes to what used to be called the Department of Defense. Now it's called the Department of War. He put out this video. You're going to see it, and here we go.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
All right. So, quick reaction, Spencer. Tell me, what do you got?
When I talked earlier about the conflation of God's will and the will of the state, that is, it exhibits A through Z right there for me.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So my initial reaction is I'm just going to be 100% honest with you. Two things. I literally physiologically feel moved,
Mm-hmm.
like positively, like
Mm-hmm.
in my body right now when I watch that video, I'm almost moved to tears.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just say that the first thing. The second thing is, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we finally have someone at the leadership of this organization that I'm a part of at the top level who cares what Christ said about um I mean, he's quoting the Lord's Prayer, this seminal
Yeah.
part of my personal Christian practice, and I think that it's something that all individuals who name the name of Messiah should pray, and I think it's something that
Mm-hmm.
nations should view as its uh, guide in one sense, right? So those are my quick thought reactions.
Okay.
But I want you to go a little deeper and explain
Sure.
what is it in particular about this that rubs you raw?
So there's a couple of different things, and actually, I encountered a few other things watching it just now that I did not encounter earlier.
Okay.
One is the idea of like, okay, on Earth, and it shows a tank as it is in
Yes.
heaven, and it shows parachuting. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, so, and then give us our daily bread, walking through a field of wheat. Um, and and then but the ones that really stuck out to me initially were the um thy kingdom come, and then it shows, like, military might, which to me is just a complete inversion of what Jesus and the early church were doing. They were not trying to, my kingdom is not from this world, and we do not fight with the weapons of the world. This is Paul in Second Corinthians. There's that. And then there's also the, like, for thine it is the kingdom and the power and the glory. And at that precise moment, they show old glory. Like, there's just so much conflation and
Yeah.
overlapping and blurring of the lines, not so much between church and state, because I think that can get way overblown, but between God's will and the will of man.
Hmm.
And almost as if saying they are the same thing.
Hmm.
Now, again, I want to be clear. I have no problem with Pete Hegseth being a Christian. I have
Hmm.
no problem with Pete Hegseth praying. I wouldn't even really have a problem with him praying in front of a group of soldiers, assuming, and consent is kind of interesting here because of the chain of command that you described, but I'll set that aside, assuming that they had willingly submitted to being a part of that prayer. Okay.
Hmm.
I have no problem with that. No problem.
Okay.
Where I do have a problem is with publishing and proclaiming to not just our nation, but the whole world, that God's will is our will.
Let me just ask you this, based on what you just said. Shouldn't it be?
Yes, it should.
All right. So starting
There,
there, I understand. Oh, please go ahead.
no. Um, I think part of what bothers me about it is, I mean, I see no reason to dissemble. Don't think, and I would say the same thing about the previous administration, but I don't think this administration is doing that, actually.
Understood. So the
So
practical,
I have no reason to dissemble about that. So
I
there's that.
understand. But I mean, it seems to me though that that actually implies then an affirmative answer to my question, which you already kind of gave, sort of, which is
Hmm.
yes, should be.
Hmm.
The will of this nation should be God's will. Like
Hmm.
it's a question. Here's the issue. It's a question of hierarchy. And the issue of hierarchy is precisely why I can watch that video and it actually makes me happy. And here, let
Okay.
me explain. Because what I see is not necessarily Pete Hegseth and this nation saying, my will is God's will. I see
Hmm.
it saying, my will should be God's will. And that's the aim that we are now making.
Okay. Okay.
That's one point
That
on
is
this.
a wonderful, admirable sentiment.
Yeah.
But again, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And then his response to that is, what did you do?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feed the least
Fair.
of these? Did you take care of these people? And so at a minimum, what we have, and this is why I said it is blasphemy or
Okay.
borders on that or something. I forget the exact language I used, is that um what we have here is a people who a nation who and its representatives who is claiming that, who is saying we are doing God's will. What we are doing with these military interventions is God's will. And the simple fact that it was that generic and universal, it wasn't like, okay, we are doing God's will by going into Somalia and rescuing these people from being raped and tortured and hacked apart by machetes. It was we, as the United States military, en masse, in toto, are doing God's will.
So
That is a massive, massive claim.
I,
And
I I don't view that as the claim. I'm just gonna say that.
okay.
I don't view we are always and only doing God's will as what Pete Hegseth was saying. I'm just going to say that real quick. I think Pete Hegseth is a Christian who, like his teachers, Doug Wilson being one of them, believes that it is his role to do his best to make
Mm-hmm.
this nation actually do the will of God. So
Okay.
when I watch that video, knowing that about Pete Hegseth, I see that as literally a prayer. Like, let your will be done through me in my role in this nation, in this job that I have been given to be the Secretary of War.
Okay.
Um,
So then my follow-up is what I
yeah.
said at the beginning about Jesus's response to that is, what did
Mm,
you do? So I
yes.
look at that and I say, I don't know, but if that is the claim, if that is what is being made, then I would expect him to be on his knees seeking and submitting
Mm,
to God's will,
mm,
saying, not just simply, what policy outcomes do you prefer here, Lord?
mm.
But I need to set aside my tribalism. I need to set aside my politics, my political party. I need to set everything else. If you want to go, order
Yeah,
of
yeah,
loves
yeah,
here,
yeah, yeah.
that is one case where I would say, yes, get rid of everything below it. Yes, I am.
Okay.
When it comes to allegiance to the king versus allegiance to Donald Trump or Joe Biden
Mhm.
or
Pick the next
George W.
guy.
Bush, don't care.
Hmm.
I am always going to say, put that out off to here.
Okay.
There's no point. Like, there is no comparison. There's no conflict between a lion and a mouse here. So,
Okay.
um, so in that sense, do I think that Hegseth's actions up to this point have demonstrated that he has that level of submission to the will of God? No.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I guess the details are where that has to be adjudicated.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand where you're coming
Because the
from.
communicator matters. It's not just the message, it's the communicator themselves,
Mhm.
which is one of the whole reasons why we have the whole, like, I mean, okay, I'm not going to say cancel culture is a good thing, but at least we recognize the validity of the idea that it's not just what is said, but why it's said and who says it and how they say it and all of those kind
Mm,
of things. When we say, um, it makes it a problem for me to be able to engage with someone when I realize that they're living a certain lifestyle. That's, or like for me as a counselor, if I don't have
mm.
children, I can't sit there and tell people how to raise their kids.
Well,
I
you
mean,
can.
I have some wisdom, but it's a very disconnected from experience kind
I
of
get what you're
wisdom.
saying. I
Um,
I'm just gonna say this, and I know that we're already over time. So if
mhm.
you have to go at any point, just go. Let me know.
Okay.
But
Okay.
um, man, I'm just gonna say this. I think that in this situation we are in right now,
Mm-hmm.
with the people who are in power right now, caring about their character, caring about their way of life is totally relevant. However, if we were to act like people act with Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth today, then we would have assassinated David.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
would not have listened to Samuel.
Okay.
We would
Mm-hmm.
not have cared what Eli had to say. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, like, God does this. I mean, look, read the book of Daniel, for example. Daniel is hugely impactful for me in my political philosophy because Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar
Mm-hmm.
that God put him in his position of authority,
Mm-hmm.
and literally tells Nebuchadnezzar that his political subjugation of his enemies was God's will. Daniel tells that to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so like
Okay.
I'm just when I think about that all, and I look at the modern scenario and I see the effects, and I again the details are going to matter about what effects we think are good, bad, all that.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think this looks to me like a kind of judge-like moment, if you will, where we have a
Mm-hmm.
really not great people necessarily. Sure, we can always find better people, um, but it seems like there's some good things happening that are aligning this nation more with the will of God than before. That's my basic take, honestly.
That's fair. Um, and that's part of the reason why I continue to be in the circles that I am, even when I share more and more disagreement, the longer I stay. um, just because I definitely don't want to just go, I don't want to make an echo chamber. I don't
Mm.
want to become someone who just says, well, I'm going to go and listen to the people who agree with me and only engage with them. And that's
Yeah.
the end of it. I mean, and
Yeah.
I'm like, you and I on our interactions have been a good example of that, just because of like we have much we agree on
Hmm.
and much we disagree on.
Sure.
And we have continued to engage over a long period of time, despite those disagreements, at times quite sharp. Not, not more often than not, but, at times. And the reason why is because you and everybody else are real people
Yeah. Yeah.
with who are images of God. And
Right.
I do not want to ever treat anyone who I disagree with as being less than that. And
Hmm.
that is, as C.S. Lewis would put it, honor enough to raise the head of the highest beggar and shame enough to lower the head of the highest king. So, in terms of
Hmm.
being a son of Adam and a daughter of Eve, is how he says that. But yes, but the point is that being an image of God means that how I treat people is how I treat God. And so I I can still disagree with him vehemently, as I did with Pete Hegseth. I can still say you are wildly mistaken
Hmm.
and wildly off,
Hmm.
as I did. um, but that doesn't mean that I go and I'm surrendering you and everything you touch to to the devil, and we need to assassinate you. We need to do any of these things.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
always saying, no, let's work within the system that we have, the country that we live in, um, pray for its well being, work toward its well being, speak truth to power, like Daniel did, where necessary. And at the end of the day, realize that our only allegiance is to King Jesus and no one else. So I know that's vague. I know that's platitudinous. I'm fully aware of all of that, but I also realize that this is complicated and this has real people attached to it. And I don't think I can sit here in my armchair and tell people that they are not being faithful. To their own master they stand or fall.
You're just doing your best to call it as you see it.
Yep.
That's all I'm doing too. I mean, I just think it's important to have dialogues like this, which is why this show exists.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, Spencer, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed
Sure.
this conversation. I'm looking forward to having you back on to dig into other subjects.
Good.
Feel free to have the last word.
Oh, last word. Um, I don't know that I have any famous last words here. Um, Honestly, I think the way that I ended the last little bit is probably good enough for now.
Good.
So yeah, I will let my yes be yes and my no be no.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, then, God bless you. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.